Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. We're excited. We're ready to roll. It's a new week of afternoon shows with Brian and Vince, the OGs, back in the house. It's going to be a good show. A lot of research went into this show in particular.
Holy moly, yes.
Mostly by you, which is fantastic because you have the knowledge of all of this, and it's fantastic. We are going to do a couple of different things, folks. So we are going to talk about Ivan Taylor briefly. We are going to talk about the defensive position battles because we didn't get to that last week because we were a little hamstrung on time on Friday. So we're gonna do that today. So we did offense last week. We're gonna do defense this week. So if you came here looking for the offensive, position battles, stick around, listen to everything we're gonna talk about. Then you can go back to the pod and you can listen to the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, last week, yeah.
Exactly. So we're going to do defense today. Then we are going to jump into the all opponent teams. And so what that means is went through all 12 rosters and picked the best quarterback, the best first and second team. So the first and second best quarterback, first and second best running back, et cetera, all the way across the board. So we'll do an offensive team and first and second team. We'll do a defensive first and second team. And then we'll wrap it up at that point. And I'll probably need to shave again.
With a little something fun, we're also going to include where Notre Dame players would be if I included them in the analysis as well.
There it is. So lots of information coming your way today, folks. We're fired up about it. And I say we just jump right in, Brian. There was some news yesterday. Recently anticipated news. I'll say that. Recently anticipated news that Ivan Taylor, safety, committed to Notre Dame, has flipped his commitment and is now committed to the University of Michigan. And again, not completely surprised, at least recently, about that, but you can go into a little bit more detail about that switch.
Depends on what you mean by recent. If you're talking about the weekend, well, if you're an Irish Breakdown board member, you saw I put an intel piece up on Sunday kind of preparing people that this was going to happen.
Right.
If you mean recently, as in like a week ago, this time a week ago, I actually was feeling better about him sticking in the class. And I don't really care to get into the particular reasons. A lot of people think it's about, he's afraid of competition. That's not it. It has nothing to do with that. I've explained this on the board. And here's the thing. Fans have to understand is there's a difference between being afraid of competition and making a business decision based on the quality of depth that's at your position, right? Like you can be the best player in the world, in your class at a position, but if the 3 years before they also landed the best player in your class at your position, then I don't mind competing, but that's a little bit absurd, right? And look, I'm not happy about Ivan Taylor's decision, but you don't choose to go to Michigan if you're afraid of competition. Can we be honest about that, right? If you're afraid of competition, you go to Georgia Tech, you go to somewhere like that.
True.
He went to Michigan. I mean, obviously Michigan did a good job recruiting him, but I do believe that part of it is, based on the intel I have, is you look at Notre Dame, and he would have been part of a 3-man safety class this year. Notre Dame signed 3 safeties last year, and they signed 3 safeties the year before that, plus they've got a 3-man cornerback class where your best player in your entire class, in my opinion, on defense, Dallas Golden, is a guy that could play nickel and probably will play nickel as a freshman. And that's a place where Ivan thought he'd have a shot to play early at Notre Dame. So he's not even the best player in his class at safety. That's Jadon Blair, or in the slot, which is Dallas Golden. And so you look at Michigan, they've got a top 100 safety in their class too. Because some people say, he wanted to be the best player in the class. Like, well, that's not a given because Kanoa Winston, the kid that's also committed to Michigan, is a top 100 safety as well. So, but he's going to be one of 2 safeties in that class, and only signed 1 safety last year. So it's just about look, I want to play as a freshman, and I got a much better shot at doing that at Michigan than I do Notre Dame. I don't think that's the same as saying, well, he's afraid of competition. Again, if he was afraid of competition, he'd go somewhere where he's easily the best player on the defense the minute he walks on the field. He'd go to Georgia Tech. He'd go to UCF. He'd go to Florida. You know what I mean? That's the reality of it. So I don't want this to turn. It's kind of disappointing when you see people a week ago. I love Ivan Taylor. He's so good, and now it's he wasn't that good. They don't need him. They're fine without him. that kind of frustrates me. But that's basically what went into his decision. There's some other things that I don't really care to get into that I've heard about the reasons that went into it. But as of right now, that's a lot of just speculation, and it doesn't matter because he's going to Michigan. And so it's a loss for Notre Dame, Vince. And the
Sure.
thing is, you don't have a kid like this that is a good football player. This was I said on Twitter last night. If a week ago you thought the kid was a really good player because he's committed to your school, and now you don't think he's a very good player because he committed somewhere else, you've lost a little bit of objectivity. Losing Ivan Taylor is not a good thing for Notre Dame. He's a talented player. I graded now. I think some services have him a little too high. It was like a top 50 guy. I have him as a top 100 guy, but it's not that far off. If I have him like 80 to 90 and you have him at 45, we're not that far off. That's kind of in the same ballpark. He's a good football player, good coverage player, and that's something that Notre Dame wanted to add more of to the secondary are safeties that can cover. And Ivan could cover. He could play safety. He could come down and play some in the nickel, play in the slot. We broke this down during the Jadon Blair commitment show, which was, there's certain matchups if you want to go 3 safeties where you can put Ivan down in the slot and say, hey, you're going to cover a shiftier slot receiver. He can handle that pretty well, in my opinion. And he's a smart kid. He's a very instinctive kid. He's got very good ball skills. So, he's a good football player. And anytime you take a kid like that out of your class, it's a loss. And that, well, they're going to be okay. And I do think they're going to be okay. But my stance is always this. Is Notre Dame in a really good spot right now, Vince, with Jadon Blair and Ethan Long at safety? Heck yeah. But wouldn't it be even better if they had Jadon Blair, Ethan Long, and Ivan Taylor?
100%.
Right. And that's what the staff wanted. They wanted 3 guys in the class. So it's certainly a loss when you have a situation like this. And I don't necessarily agree with Ivan's decision. I don't agree with the way he went about it. I wish he would have been more upfront with people, because when you say things like, well, it's about the relationship and all that, and then all the schools you're looking at have brand new DB coaches, it just doesn't come across as genuine, right? Just say, hey, listen, I made my decision for this reasons. And I do think he committed too soon. I do think there's accuracy to that statement, but just say, hey, look, I committed too soon, and I committed to a coach, and you're not supposed to commit to a coach. You're supposed to commit more than that. And I just need to make sure that I'm doing this, and this. And you know what? All right, cool, man. I get you. I respect that. But when you start talking about it's the position coach and all this, well, now it's almost kind of like you're taking shots at Mike Mickens a little bit. Like, well, I would have played for Chris O'Leary, but I don't want to play for Mike Mickens. And I just think, but that's part of the growing up process for them. Vince, right? Is they're getting microphones shoved in their faces, and they're having people calling them and DMing them and doing all this, and they're 17 years old. And it's like, I don't know that I would have always given the most mature answer to these type of situations when I was 17. And so it's a learning process for Ivan. But at the end of the day, he has to do what's best for him. And he didn't feel that was Notre Dame. I may disagree with it, but he didn't feel that was best for him. And honestly, I wish the kid well, because Ivan's a good kid. He's always been up front with us. He's never told us, oh, no, I'm locked into Notre Dame. I'm locked into Notre Dame. And our confidence just came from maybe some conversations that we'd had with people around him and other recruits and all that type of stuff. And just kind of the feeling like we never felt from the people we talked to, and I'm not talking about Notre Dame coaches or people around him, I'm talking to other people, we never got the sense that he was necessarily in love with Michigan. But he also wasn't in love with Notre Dame anymore. So you kind of looked at it and you're like, okay, at the end of the day, what is he looking for? And I think so. That's the thing, is I think he liked the Notre Dame. I think he liked the Michigan. I think he liked Florida. But he had to sit down and decide, okay, what are the most important things for me? What school best fits some of those things? And what are my top priorities? And I just think at the end of the day, he thought Michigan was a better fit for his top priorities. And I can't fault a kid for that.
Sure.
And he didn't lie to anybody. As far as I know, he was open with the staff about, they knew he was going to take visits to Bama. They knew he was going to take visits to Michigan. End of the day, it didn't work out for Notre Dame. That's recruiting, but it is a loss. No one should sit there and say, oh, it's not a loss. Yes, they're going to be safety. Of course, they're going to be fine at safety. But as I've said this about, remember the Logan Diggs? Oh, they're going to be fine at running back without Logan Diggs. Yeah, they're going to be fine. But wouldn't it be better if they also had him as well as what? And that's kind of how I feel about Ivan. So, he's a good football player. He's a top 100 football player. My grade for him doesn't change just because he's now committed to Michigan. You know what I mean? He's a top 100 player. He's a good football player. It's a very good pickup for Michigan.
So what does this mean specifically for Notre Dame? You said they're going to be fine at safety.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to dig into that a little bit
Yeah,
about
yeah,
specifically kind of like, what does it
yeah.
mean for Notre Dame?
So this is all coming from a standpoint of where they're going to be now, right? And it's not they're fine without Ivan Taylor. It's like, okay, he made his decision. We would have loved to have had him. He's not here. So what do we do next?
Sure.
Well, first and foremost, they signed 3 safeties last year, one of which I think is a top 100 player in Bronte Johnson. Another guy that I actually liked a lot, Vince, I had Kennedy Urlacher as a top 250 player. I think he's a very good football player. He's more of a niche guy. He's more of a downhill, alley player.
He's
right.
a lay the wood guy. No doubt
right.
about
He's
it.
not going to be playing the post a ton and things like that, but he's still a good football player. And then Tape Rob Benny Powell's a nice depth player, good special teams guy, nice depth player. And then you look at this year's class, you had Ethan Long, who I graded out as a top 150 player. Let me just check that real quick, but I'm pretty sure I had him as a top 150 player for Notre Dame, graded out as top 150 guy. And he was also a guy, by the way, that Michigan really wanted. So Michigan and Notre Dame battled for 3 safeties. Notre Dame won 2 out of those 3 battles. So,
and they were winning 3 out of 3 until yesterday.
Right. Well, and then part of the reason they lost because here's the other thing too is I do believe that if Jadon Blair would have picked Michigan, Ivan Taylor would have stayed in the class for Notre Dame or Penn State. If he would have picked Penn State,
something not Notre Dame.
Yeah. Agree. If Notre Dame was not going to land a 3rd safety, I think Ivan would have stayed in the class.
Okay.
I do. Now, he didn't, and so because it's not a coincidence that it happened 2 days. He told us to have 2 days after
on top of
Jadon commits. But anyway, when you look at it, they've got Ethan Long coming in, who I graded out as I do have him as a top 150 guy. By the way, Vince, I do have him as a top 150 player. He's a kid that had Ethan Long's offer list was Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, UCLA, Wisconsin, Michigan State. That's a pretty good offer list. And then, of course, you landed Jadon Blair. Mm-hmm. And we've been saying on the show for the last 2 months that Jadon Blair, I've said this, Ryan has said this, Vince, I know you haven't graded the players out, but we both grade out Ivan Taylor below Jadon Blair. We both had Ivan in the top 100, and I've got Jadon as a top 50 guy. Jadon's my number 2 ranked player in this class. Ivan was 3rd for me, which says a lot about how good the secondary class is and was and still is, because of the top 4 players the top 3 players in the class are still DBs, because Ivan Taylor's out and Mark Zachary just slides right into that number 3 spot, and so you're still good there. You got a top 150 safety and Ethan Long, who's a lot like Ivan Taylor. Cover guy, instinctive, high football IQ, not a burner speed-wise. Ivan Taylor, I think last summer ran like a 4.59 and a high 4.6 in his two 40-yard dash times at Notre Dame. And so he's not a burner, but he's really smooth. He's athletic. He's fluid. He's very smart. He's in the right position all the time. He knows where to be. Well, who does that sound like? That sounds a lot like Ethan Long. And so now Ethan needs to get a little bit more explosive and those type of things. But, Ethan's a very similar player, can play the post. The only thing that one of the reasons that I believe Ivan is better than Ethan is because Ethan is a safety. He can play field. He can play boundary. One of the things I like about Ivan, on top of just being a little bit more advanced right now, is Ivan is also a guy that I think could come down and play the nickel. And I value versatility. 100%. And when you can play 3 positions compared to another guy can only play 2, that's going to be a big addition for me, because that means something to me. And so Ethan is more of a pure safety. He's more of a true post safety. And then Jadon can just do whatever the heck Jadon wants to do. He's just an elite player. He's a top 50 player. So you're still good there. So you landed a top 100 player last year in Bronte Johnson. You landed a top 150 guy the year before on my board. So when I'm giving you top whatever, I'm talking about my grades. A top 150 guy the year before in Adon Schuler. You've got a top 150 guy in Ethan Long, and now you've got a top 50 guy in Jadon Blair. And then another top 250 guy in Kennedy Urlacher. So you've recruited that position pretty well the last couple of years. And so I think that they're good with where they are at the 2, but Notre Dame does want a 3rd safety. And that's kind of what comes next, Vince, is they do want a 3rd safety, and that's where I think they're going to turn and focus some of their attention is on Brandon Logan, who is a kid that's from Snyder High School in Fort Wayne.
Yep. He's a baseball player, right?
Committed to, he's been committed to Vanderbilt to play baseball. Now, if y'all don't know anything about college baseball, Vanderbilt's basically kind of like Georgia, Bama, Ohio State of
they're perennial college World Series team.
Right.
I mean,
and win a lot of championships. I think they won a title 2-3 years ago, right? So they've won a lot of titles. I'm actually looking at their baseball team now. They've won national college World Series in 2019 and 2014, and then they were the runner-up in 21 and 15. So going back to 2014, when the college football playoff started, right, is the same year. They've won 2 national championships in baseball, and they've been runner-up 2 other times as well.
Yeah.
So they're a big-time baseball program, and he was committed there. So the academics are good, right? Because baseball can't get the exceptions in at those schools the way the football can.
Right.
And so he's good academically. He's a different type of player than Ivan. He's 5'11", he's 185. He's a little bit more explosive. He's more of a thumper. He's more of a guy that's going to hit. He can do some coverage things. And the Notre Dame's kind of view on Ivan Taylor's flirtations with other schools changed a little bit, honestly, because of Brandon Logan. Now, in past years, you'd probably see Notre Dame try to stay on Ivan and maybe try to flip him back. The presence of Brandon Logan changed that, and here's kind of why that happened. They liked this film, but they weren't sure if he wanted to play football. Well, he made the decision. They convinced him to come to Irish Invasion, and he worked out at Irish Invasion, which kind of shows his interest in Notre Dame. He measured in at 5'11 and a half, 186 pounds. He has 32.25-inch arms. That's exceptionally long for a safety. He ran a 4.44 and a 4.47 now. If I have access to the 40 times from that, they're not inflated. They didn't pump up all the times. There's not a lot of guys that ran in the 4.4s. He ran a 4.44 and a 4.47, and then Vince, he ran a 4.61 in the pro shuttle, and then had a 124-inch broad jump. Those are explosive numbers for a rising senior in high school. Very explosive numbers. And just so you all understand, these are not times that Notre Dame makes public. These aren't pump a kid up times. These are evaluation times. These are things that Notre Dame is looking at to say, is this a kid we want to make a push for or not? When he performed like that at Irish Invasion, that made them a little bit more willing to say, hey, this kid's legit. We can turn our attention here.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think they're going to go with that, Vince, is I think they're now going to ramp things up. And from my understanding, is baseball and football on the same page. Baseball's like, if you can get that kid to Notre Dame,
duh.
You know what I mean? Like, we are all about it, baby. Yeah. We are all about it.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Because he would play. Well, the thing is, Coach Stiffer obviously is excited, but I would assume. But it's more about, would the football team be willing to let him play baseball also? And they've always been willing to do that.
Right.
I mean, Drake Bowen played baseball this
year. As long as football's number one, because he would be a scholarship player, for football, then I mean, Coach Stiffer's, I guess we could find a spot for him if you bring him in.
Sure.
I mean, we'll make some room.
Right. So that's where I think Notre Dame is going to go, Vince, is that I think that's the direction they're going to go.
Okay.
So the other part too is, just quickly, because we'll have future shows that we'll dive into a little bit more about this. But he is a guy that, or the other thing that about this, Vince, is that this also is going to factor into next year. And one of the things that this does is this opens up a little bit of a good situation for Notre Dame for next year.
Okay.
When it comes to recruiting what is a loaded safety class that Notre Dame's already in some really, really good positions with. So they're going to be good there too. So you add a big, if now again, they got to land this kid. This isn't a gimme. Brandon Logan's not a gimme. They got to land him. And
going to Vanderbilt to play baseball is a pretty good future. Okay?
Right. Exactly.
Not that he would be giving up a base future, but you're going to be giving up being a full-time baseball player if you come to Notre Dame.
It's a lot yes, correct, because I don't know that he's going to play football at Vanderbilt.
Right.
And Vanderbilt obviously has got a much better track record of producing high draft picks than Notre Dame does in baseball.
I mean, those are just facts.
But he's going to get a chance to do that, and Notre Dame has had their fair share of success in baseball in recent years. So, I think that'll work. So if they can get him, that helps. But you land Brandon Logan, that doesn't tell next year's studs. It doesn't tell Braylon Womack. It doesn't tell Blaine Bradford. It doesn't tell Zach Ford. It doesn't tell all the kids on the safety board next year, hey, be afraid of going to Notre Dame like landing 2 top 100 guys would have in Ivan Taylor and Jadon Blair. So I actually think it stings now. I'm not going to spin it. I'm not going to be like, hey, guys, Brandon Logan's actually a better player than Ivan Taylor. I'll say this. Brandon Logan's a better athlete than Ivan Taylor. There's no doubt about that. Not a better football player right now. But I do like Brandon Logan's film. And if Notre Dame's able to land him, we'll dive more into the film room at the time. This kid I like, Vince, and I think you and I have talked about Brandon Logan a little bit. I've mentioned him a few weeks ago. Like, look, if Ivan flips, this is a really good kid to go after. This is a good, quote unquote, consolation prize. It's a really good football player. Mm-hmm. He's just learning. He's never been a football player. In his mind, he's a baseball guy.
Sure. So
if he can kind of, get coached
what a great
up.
Position to be in. I'm just saying.
Do I want to go to Notre Dame for football or Vanderbilt for baseball?
Gosh, what a great position to be in.
Right. So they're going to have to push and convince him that this is the route he should go. And I don't know that that's, he hasn't made a decision from what I understand that that's what he's going to do, but that's what I would do if I was Notre Dame. And then now ramp up your efforts on next year's elite safety class, because it's a great safety class. And now it's going to be a little bit more, you're going to be in a better position to convince those guys that you're not walking into a nutty depth chart now. And, because again, Brandon Logan may end up being a dude, but he's not going to scare off guys that are already dudes, if that makes sense. So it could end up stinging a little bit this year more, but if it opens up some opportunities for next year for some guys that are better than Ivan Taylor, and I think that Braylon Womack is, I think that Blaine Bradford is, then, okay, then it works out in the end. And that's what recruiting is, right? Every school has losses. Every school has kids flip.
Sure.
So what do you do about it? And the nice thing that I like about what Notre Dame does is they weren't caught with their pants down, and they had a plan. And as soon as the move was made, they executed that plan.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to make the most of it. So
yeah. And recruiting is just such a funny thing because every kid's priorities are different and they change. I mean, that's the other thing. A kid's priorities when he's coming out of his sophomore year could be completely different going into his senior year. And they change, they adjust, and you got to adjust on the fly. And I'm not blaming Notre Dame here in any way, shape, or form for losing this kid, because it doesn't sound like that's the case. But kids' priorities they adjust, they move, they change. It depends on, who's getting offers and who's doing this and who's doing. I mean, you've been a recruiting coordinator, you've been recruited as an athlete. I'm dealing with it with my kid. It's amazing how I can definitely relate to the whole Jadon Blair, Ivan Taylor, like keeping an eye on each other because you're the same position. I mean, I'm sitting here watching Twitter to find out which kickers are going where and who's getting offers and doing different things, because that then reflects on what is going to be available. And I mean, it's just a domino
not that
effect.
Dylan's afraid of competition, but it's about, dude, that's just putting yourself in a situation that you're just right. So that's the thing, is like a lot of people saying, well, he's afraid of competition. He's afraid of competition. And even when I explain this, there's still going to be people that just are like, he's still afraid of competition. And I'm like, look, that's not always the case.
Right.
That's can be a very shallow view, in my opinion.
Agreed.
It comes down to these kids are making business decisions, right? They're making business decisions. And Ivan Taylor wants to go somewhere where the opportunity for him to play earlier is going to be there. If he was afraid of competition, you don't go to Michigan or Notre Dame or Ohio State or Georgia or Bama if you're afraid of competition. Right. You just don't. You go somewhere where literally you're the big fish in the small pond. And he's not going to be that at Michigan because there's another top 100 safety in his class. But when you look at the whole thing, there's a much more favorable path to him.
Right.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with the kid making that decision. As long as it takes him to a place like Michigan. Like, I hate Michigan. Everybody knows that. I hate Michigan.
Sure.
But they've been in the college football playoff 3 years in a row. You don't go there if you're afraid of competition. You don't go there if you're afraid of being on a big stage or having people who judge you harshly or whatever the case may be. You don't pick a Michigan. You go to Michigan State if you want to be in the smaller spotlight.
Right.
Or if you want an easy path to go on. So,
for sure.
So again, I can sit there and say, like, there's a Michigan fan in the chat talking about how, Brian's a Michigan hater. Yeah, I've never hidden that fact.
Yeah.
I've never hidden that fact.
But it doesn't change your analysis.
Exactly.
That's the difference.
Exactly. Exactly.
I hate Michigan too, but I
Right.
can still appreciate when they do good things or when they pick up good
But
players
when a
or
kid picks
whatever.
there, you don't say, well, he's afraid of competition. Well, then he wouldn't have gone to Michigan.
Right.
Right. But at the end of the day, to your point, that's a great analogy that you're dealing with now, Vince, with your son, which is no, he's not afraid of competition, but I'm not going to send him somewhere that's got 5 kickers in his class.
Right.
Because
Exactly.
he's not going to get the reps that he needs to be developed
100%.
in that situation.
And you're also looking at depth charts and everything else. I'm also not going to send him to a school that has 5 kickers on the roster because that's ridiculous. You know what I mean? Yep. So it's all encompassing, right? So it's not just your class; it's also the depth chart. So
now, is that could you say that it's a semantic argument? Because if you're going to a place with a lighter depth chart, you're still kind of, wanting an easier path. Okay, it's a bit of a semantic thing, but again, when you say someone's afraid of something, that's a whole different deal. Like, I don't want to compete against that guy. I don't want to compete against but no, it's just more of like, look, I'll compete my butt off, but I'd rather compete my butt off against 3 dudes.
But it's a
and
number
7.
thing. Yeah, it's a
right.
It's a
That's
thing.
The difference.
You don't think, for example, I'm just throwing this out as an example. You don't think Kenny Minchie would have loved more reps last year with the varsity, but he had to go down and do some show team stuff, and that because there were other quarterbacks on the roster. And that, like I said, that's just an example. There's usually 4 quarterbacks on a roster, whatever. But I'm just saying, the more people that are in the depth chart that are on the roster, the less opportunities you're going to get even to show how good you are. You know what I mean? And again, it's not a fear of competition. In fact, in my kid's situation, I don't want to go down this road a whole lot, but it's most likely going to be a preferred walk-on, and they only scholarship the starter. And when a coach told my kid that, his eyes just lit up. He's like, let's go. Like, he wants that competition. He wants to be the starter. But why would you jump into a mix and be the 6th kicker on a roster? That's just
that's
silly.
not being afraid of anything.
No,
that's called making a smart, wise decision.
Correct. 100%.
And it's not, again, he's picking between 2 really good programs.
Exactly.
Where he can get a really good education at both places. Is Michigan like Notre Dame was academically? No, it's not. But is Michigan considered a very good academic school? Yeah. 100%. If he wants to get a good degree, he can get a good degree from Michigan. It's not like, again, it's not like Notre Dame. So we can get into this thing, but at the end of the day, it's not coming to Notre Dame.
Right.
And I think Notre Dame's going to be okay. I think they're going to be okay. It's a loss, but they're going to be okay. I expect them to transition and really push for Brandon Logan. And then, like I said, it opens up some opportunities for next year's class, which I think could work out really well. And again, you're still looking at a 5-man group of DBs that's as good as any in the country. Yeah. That's the reality of it. When you got Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, Cree Thomas, Ethan Long, and Jadon Blair. I mean, the 2 lowest graded kids on the board for me are Ethan Long, who I grade as a top 150 guy, who had offers from Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, right? We talked about that. And Cree Thomas, who just committed to play in the Army All-American game. Like 3-4 years ago, those are your 2 best DB commits. Well, I should say 4 or 5 years ago, pre-Mike Mickens. Those are like your 2 best DBs in the class right there. The guys are at the bottom 2. And it just speaks volumes about how good the class is going to be. So, they're going to be all right. They're going to be all right.
Before we move on to the next section, Brian, I just want to remind everybody, hit that like button, the subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, jump on the boards. Boards.irishbreakdown.com. You would have had this information on Sunday if you would have jumped on the boards. I'm just saying, just throwing it out there, just saying. So make sure you hit that up, and we'd really appreciate it. Let's jump into our next segment, Brian, and this is the defensive position battles. And as I mentioned prior, we did the offensive position battles on Friday, so a few days ago. But we kind of ran out of time. We had it hard out because we had to talk about Jadon Blair and his commitment to Notre Dame, and so that was a fun little side piece of a show that we don't normally do on a Friday. So
I'll take that.
100%. So we didn't have time to do the defensive position battles, and so we want to make sure we get after that today. Again, if you're looking for the offensive battles, you can either go to YouTube on Friday, or you can check out the podcast that was uploaded, I believe, Saturday morning. It'll be right there. And so you can go check that out as well. But don't go anywhere because we're going to have the defensive position battles right now. So, Brian, this is going to be a little bit different than the offensive position battles because I don't want to say they're not as important because I don't want to belittle the battles that are actually taking place on the defensive side of the ball, but they're different than the offensive side of the ball. We're not, I mean, offense, we're talking like right tackle, left guard, the second quarterback position, the wide receiver rotation. Like there are some legitimate, position battles going on. I don't know that that's so much the case defensively, but still some good stuff to talk about for sure.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is, Vince, because on offense, some of those position battles are at very important spots where we're hoping that the guys that win it can become really important players. You know what I mean? Like when we talk about Jagasol and Rocco Spindler, we're hoping that they can be like, not just win the job, but be dudes.
Yes.
When you're talking about the boundary receiver position, like we're hoping that somebody breaks out and becomes a dude.
Right.
Whereas on defense, it's kind of like you already have your dudes. Right, it's Xavier Watts, it's Benjamin Morrison, it's Howard Cross and Riley Mills and guys like that. Where now it's like, okay, the battles here are more about who's going to play opposite Benjamin Morrison, right? Like who's going to play opposite Xavier Watts. Like there's a chance that one of the guys that steps into the starting lineup on the offensive line could emerge as their best offensive lineman, this upcoming season. So, it's a little bit of I think they're just as important in regard to putting an entire team together, but they're more complementary players than they are guys that need to step up and be guys. I mean, we sat there when we were talking about the offense and we broke down why it's so important that boundary position have somebody really emerge because of how important it is to the offense. Well, yeah, the boundary safety is a pretty important position too, but you've got an All-American opposite that guy, and you got an All-American into the boundary with you at corner. And so there's an All-American nose tackle that's putting pressure on the quarterback. It's just some different stakes involved, in my opinion, at some of these positions. But the other unique thing, however, Vince, is that it doesn't take away some of the potential impact. And I think that's the difference for me. Like we're going to talk, one of the positions we'll talk about here in a minute is going to be like the Viper position. Who's going to be that next guy in after Jordan Patojo? Well, yeah, it's not a real, glamorous discussion, the number 2 Viper, but depending on who you saw what I was trying not to use the word, depending on who wins that battle could turn it into someone like, boy, that guy ends up being an impact player. And so those are things, look, the guy that's going to win the job opposite Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts. So we just got done talking about maybe why they're not as sexy players. There's no other way to say it. Right?
You had to do it.
But at the same time, those guys are going to get targeted a lot more because of who's on the other side of the field.
Sure.
And so it is important. It's just not going to get the same oxygen that you have on offense because, again, the left tackle is a prime position, right, at Notre Dame. So when you talk about like a newcomer that's got to break out, well, the guy next to him, that the left side of the line is like as a unit is vitally important to success. Well, who the left tackle is going to be, but what about left guard? Who's that going to be? Who's going to play next to your left tackle? And you've got a big time quarterback. Well, you need your O-line to be shored up, and you need the right tackle. So there's all these different layers to it that just make it more intriguing. But I don't think it makes these battles less important.
Sure.
In my opinion.
All right. So let's just jump right on into it. We'll start with field corner. And this is the spot opposite Benjamin Morrison. And of course, for, basis of this conversation, we're assuming Ben Morrison's going to be ready to go, playing boundary, no problem. Texas A&M, he's in the boundary. The competition for field corner, I think, is going to be a good one. Because you've got young, quote unquote, up and comer Christian Gray, who we've talked an immense amount about. And then, of course, Jaden Mickey, who is Benjamin Morrison's classmate. So he's been around for a few years. And I mean, he exploded onto the scene in the spring. Remember that?
He was part of that. Yes.
I mean, he exploded onto
He was very good.
Yeah. Exploded onto the scene. And he's kind of, I don't want to say he's looking for his role, but he hasn't locked down a starting position yet. And so he's going to be competing at that field corner position in the fall with Christian Gray. So this one, I think you could relate to the offense because this is going to be a dynamic. Whoever wins this one, games are going to come down to whoever wins this game or whoever wins this role.
Here's what adds a little bit of a wrinkle to this battle too. Depending on how much we see of Benjamin Morrison in fall camp,
sure,
Christian Gray's not even in playing as much field corner. Like, let's say Benjamin Morrison for the first week of fall camp is just not out there yet. They haven't fully cleared him yet. Who's going to be the boundary corner? It's going to be Christian Gray.
Yeah.
If Benjamin Morrison can't play in the first game of the year, let's just say, and I'm not saying he's not going to. What we've been told is they expect to be ready for Texas A&M, but you never know. Well, who's going to be starting a boundary corner in that game? It's going to be Christian Gray. Well, what does that do for his discussion or the discussion about who starts at the field corner?
That's a good point.
So then it's like, well, yeah, he's getting Jaden's getting a ton of those reps there. Well, you're also getting a ton of reps from Benjamin from the other kid too, right? You're also getting a ton of reps from Christian Gray, which is not the same position.
Yeah.
And he can go play the field position easily. The other part of this too is the reality is they're both going to play and play a lot. Okay. Notre Dame does not play two corners and that's it. Even last year when I think they had one of the 3 or 4 best corner rooms in the country, Jaden Mickey still played, Christian Gray still played. Now against Ohio State, they didn't play as much. That's how it's going to be. But every other week they played a lot.
That's how any team is. I mean, that's when you're in a big game, your stars play more. I mean, that's the way it goes. You can talk about any position group, and that would be the case, right? So, but you're right. They dip into their depth, and depth is important when it comes to the secondary. And so, whoever doesn't win this battle is going to play. I mean, there could be, I could see a reality where it's basically a 3-man, rotation essentially. You could bring in, if you want to spell Benjamin Morrison, you flip Christian Gray to the boundary, you bring in Mickey to play the field, and and just kind of rotate them, like that. And so I could definitely see that being the case depending on who wins this battle and who doesn't. And that's a really good point on your part as far as,
thank you.
If Benjamin Morrison isn't ready to go, then Mickey is going to get all of those first team reps over there in the field.
Now, I would imagine that you'll see Benjamin or Christian play in the field some as well. But as you said, it's going to be a situation where he's going to be playing even more in the boundary.
Yeah.
And so then the question becomes, okay, well, what do we see from both of these guys in this battle to determine how the reps are divvied up? That's really more of where the battle is. Who's the starter and who's going to be in there when it matters the most, meaning fourth quarter.
Sure.
And what's the rep split? Because the interesting thing is, and here's the other thing Notre Dame has to think about. Okay, do we start Mickey and then have Christian be just the swing guy that plays both? And then if he does that, at the end of the day, his reps may be very similar, if not more than Jaden Mickey's, because he's going to rotate with Jaden. But then also every 3rd or 4th series, when they want to give Benjamin Morrison a blow, Christian Gray's playing that position as well. So there's a chance he may end up playing more than Jaden Mickey if you flip him. But what if he's your best field guy? Do you just leave him there and say, okay, well, he's just got to be our field guy? And then do you figure out who's going to be your number 2 boundary? Like, there's some legitimate decisions Notre Dame has to make here based on how this battle goes.
Yeah.
And part of that depends on Jaden Mickey. How good is Jaden Mickey going to be this fall? Look, we know he's got ability. Can he continue building on his strengths, which is, he literally strength. He's one of the strongest corners you're going to see.
Yeah.
He's a downhill physical run stopper, play the screen, good at reroutes. But then you look at it and say, okay, but what about, his ability to play over the top? Can he play over top on the post? Can he play against some of the more speed aspects of it? Those are all different things. It's going to be kind of interesting to see how it all shakes out.
Well, and both of these kids are very talented corners, but they're different, right? I mean, they're different corners, and I think that to figure out who the starter is going to be, number one, it depends on what they're looking for. Okay, what is Coach Mickens and Coach Golden looking for in that spot? And number two, I think it's going to be like one of those those tiebreakers, right? Where they are equal, and then you're going to kind of get down a little ways, and it's like, okay, here's where we start to see some variance. You know what I mean? And so they're going to be, I don't want to say splitting hairs, because I think both of these kids are talented, right? I just think we're talking about two high-level guys that are battling for this position. And so I think when it comes to who's going to be the starter, who's going to be the rotator, I feel like it's going to come down to some little things here and there. And of course, you want to be able to check the box when it comes to these little things, right? But I think that's what it's going to come down to. I don't think it's going to be a situation where it's completely obvious to the everyday fan who should win that spot. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
I think they're both high level kids, and I think they both can compete at that spot.
Yes, but I think it's also okay to say, but Christian Gray is more talented.
Sure. Yeah.
Like,
100%.
That's also okay to say.
Yeah.
And that's where it can be a bit of an issue for your position coach.
Sure.
But in the way that Notre Dame wants to play their defense, it doesn't have to be an either or, like an or situation. It's a both and situation. They're both going to play.
Correct.
And you have to, when you're out Golden, this can be a challenge, but also a blessing. It's okay. Well, when Jaden's in the game, we're going to do some more of this. When Benjamin's in the game, we're going to do more of this. So then does that impact the safety position? Okay, so when Benjamin's in the game, I said Benjamin, I meant Christian. When Jaden's in the game, then you have to look at a situation and say, okay, does that change how they use Xavier Watts or the safeties compared to Christian, where they can just kind of play more cover one, those type of things? And so that's kind of how I look at it. Is that right?
Sure.
There is.
It's a domino effect.
It does. It does. Yeah. And then how do you use that? I mean, and look, there's going to be weeks where you're playing a team that's playing a ton of quick game. They're running a lot of they're a quick game air raid type team. They're going to throw the quick outs, the bubbles, the nows. That's going to be a Jaden Mickey game. He's going to come blow people up, right? Sure. Then you're playing those teams that like run a lot of vertical routes. Like, I mean, we're going to drop back, we're going to throw it deep, throw it vertical. Think about, if you're playing against Mike Denbrock's LSU team last year, you're going to want Christian Gray in the game a lot more because that's vertical routes. You want man coverage. You want your corners that can play those type of routes. So those things are going to factor into the conversation as well. But at the end of the day, Vince, these kids are both going to play.
Right.
And they need them both to play well.
Mm-hmm.
The battle is more of who starts, who plays in the fourth quarter. And that answer may not be the same guy.
Right. That's fair.
And then how do they use Benjamin? How do they use Christian if Benjamin's not playing or not playing as much? Those are all going to be very interesting. Because, I mean, I've said before, look, I think Christian Gray is the most physically talented corner on the roster. It's not their best corner. That's Benjamin Morrison, clearly. Because there's a lot more that goes into being a great football player than just physical talent. But you also can't – you can say that and say, but, man, you got to find – you got to find a way to use Jaden Mickey. He's too good of a football player.
Yeah.
And I don't know that the slot is where they – I mean, I've said this a million times. I wish they'd move him to the slot. Well, that's not going to happen this year.
Right.
So, yeah.
So your prediction on how this is all going to shake out?
It's it right there. If Benjamin Morrison was healthy – and did not have the injury, I'd say I'm pretty sure that Christian Gray is going to be the guy. But with him out and the fact that they're going to need him, it's going to be a little bit different. But at the end of the day, how's it going to shake out? They're both going to play a bunch of football, and they're both going to be counted on.
Yeah.
If this is going to once again be one of the 5 best secondaries in the country, which it was last year, then this, they're both going to have to play and play well.
Sure.
That's the key.
100%. Next position to talk about. We're going to stay in the defensive backfield, and we're going to talk boundary safety. So this is the guy that's going to be lining up next to Xavier Watts. This is the guy, or this is the position where you had pretty much a rookie in there all spring taking the first team reps in Adon Schuler, while you had Rod Hurd finishing up his degree at Northwestern. And so he was kind of in and out of meetings. He wasn't living in town. He was living in Chicago, but he was here for a bunch of stuff. And so got those mental reps and things like that. But because of how well Adon played and the opportunity that he got in the spring, this is now, at least at the beginning of fall camp, this is a position battle. I mean, I don't think you would be giving Adon his just due for how well he played in the spring to at least not give him a shot at earning the starting nod at this position. Now, I do think that there is a bit of the same conversation going on that we had with the corner position, in that whoever does not win this job is still going to play a bunch, right? It just depends on who's going to start, who's going to be in there in the fourth quarter. All the same questions that we have for corner. We're just kind of talking about a different position at safety.
So this is another one where, to start off with, they're both going to play. This is one, however, where how Rod Hurd transitions to safety, how well he transitioned to safety, is going to go a very long way towards determining how a Don Schuler is used, right? Because if Rod is real comfortable at the position, then I could see him being maybe the guy that not only plays boundary, but then also moves over to the field when you want to give Xavier a breather. And then Adon also plays there.
Okay.
Right? Because Rod comes to Notre Dame he played nickel. He's played some safety, he's played some corner, but he's been a slot guy his whole career, which means he's been a field guy. Well, now he's moving to boundary safety. That could end up making a situation where, he's not super comfortable, and you got to lock him in at one spot because he's got to you got to give him all the reps there to get comfortable. Or he's a fifth-year senior that's played a lot of football, and it's a pretty smooth transition. Exactly.
I mean,
right. And he's played over 2,000 snaps of football in his career. He's played over 1,500 in the last 2 years alone.
Right.
And so he makes the transition. He makes a smooth transition to there. And now you can kind of say, hey, look, we can play him at both spots. So now Adon's going to now get more bump at the boundary, because when Xavier goes out, then Rod moves over there. And it could be that kind of situation. So this is one where they're both going to play. Notre Dame really needs Rod Hurd to step up and have a good transition and prove himself to be capable of playing a bunch. And that's not a given. I mean, they landed Antonio Carter last year thinking he was going to battle for a two-deep spot, and he didn't. So, this one's one where this is why it's kind of hard to get to like, ooh, this is going to be an intense battle, because it doesn't matter who starts. They're both going to play. And if Adon Schuler starts, it doesn't mean he's going to play more snaps than Rod Hurd. And if Rod Hurd starts, it doesn't mean that, he's going to play more snaps than Adon Schuler. They're both going to play a bunch. And
I do like the thought process of Rod Hurd being able to play both positions. I know that might be throwing a lot onto the plate of a guy who didn't get a chance to participate fully in the spring, at least from a physical standpoint. I mean, he was down, like I said, he was in there mentally. He's learning the position. He's learning the room. He's learning the defense. He's doing all of those things. But I do like the concept of him being kind of the versatile guy who can play both spots, and then Adon can come in and he only has to worry about playing the one position and getting good at the one position, because he is a young guy who doesn't have a lot of snaps under his belt, obviously, right? And I wouldn't want to put that kind of stuff on his plate. I would much rather put that on the plate of the fifth-year senior as opposed to the, true sophomore, I believe. Off the top of my head. And so that I do like that concept and that thought process.
Now here's the devil's argument kind of counter to that.
Okay.
He will, however, have an whole extra year in the system than what Rod Hurd will have.
This is true.
He's played safety more in the last year than Rod Hurd has. Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
you're absolutely right.
That's the other part of it. Is like, so is he better positioned to be that swing guy? Because here's the thing, there's a chance neither of them are positioned to be the swing guy, and you have to go to your fourth safety. So then does Luke Talent step up, and is he ready to play? Sure. Is Ben Minnick ready to play? Is one of the so it gets into some tricky situations for Notre Dame in regard to how that rotation is going to be. A 3-man safety rotation like last year? Is it going to be a 4-man safety rotation like it was in 2022? Those are all interesting parts of the conversation. And how well one of these two guys can handle playing that field position, Vince, potentially is going to impact that. So they're not only battling for the starting job here, I think these two kids are both battling for who's going to get some reps maybe over here. Yeah. In the field spot where Xavier Watts plays when you want to give Xavier a breather. I think that's more of the interesting thing that you could look at, Vince, and say, okay, yes, they're battling, but they're battling for more than just this. It's like when we've talked about tight end battles. Whenever there's a battle for like the number 2 tight end spot, like you're not just battling the other tight ends. You're battling the slot receivers.
Right.
You're battling the running backs, because you're battling for whether or not you're even going to be on the field in 12 personnel where you're on the field together. There may be times where Rod and Adon are on the field together, but if they both don't play well and prove themselves capable of that, then they're going to be very stuck to, okay, you're just rotating together at one position. And now, is that Adon, who's been in the system longer? Is that Rod, who's played like 2,000 more snaps of college football than Adon? That's going to be that to me, honestly, Vince, is more intriguing than who starts at boundary.
Yeah.
Honestly, is do either of them show themselves to have the grasp of the defense that is needed to play both spots?
To have the versatility. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Another position that we want to talk about, and it's kind of secondary, it's kind of second level, and that's obviously the rover position. And the rover position is very interesting to me, Brian, because when the rover position was first kind of introduced at Notre Dame, everybody was super excited about the rover, right? I mean, it was Drew Tranquil, it was, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, it was, these big name guys that have been on the defense. I mean, when you think of the Notre Dame defense, you think of these guys a lot of times, right? And the last couple of years, I'm not saying the rover is insignificant. That's not the point I'm making. But the point I am more making is that if you go through it, I feel like the nickel was probably on the field more than the rover. And so there's been a bit of a shift when it comes to our thinking and our talking points and things like that when it comes to the defense. Because now it's okay, you were brought into Notre Dame to be a rover. Well, you might not even be a starter anymore. It's a weird juxtaposition that only a few years ago, this is completely kind of flipped on its head because of the offense that the defense is now attempting to defend. And so there's still a rover position. There's still a competition there. And obviously, you've got Jalen Sneed as one guy that is competing for that spot. And you've got Jaden Osbury as another guy who's competing for that spot. And then you've got Jaden Osbury, who's been also learning how to be a nickel. And you've got Jalen Sneed, who has also been learning how to be a will. And so it's like, are you a rover anymore? There's just a lot of question marks for me when it comes to the rover position in general. And I know that the rover is still an important piece and they still use it and all of those different things, but we're just talking about it differently nowadays.
It's also unique this year because of the unique skill set of Jaden Osbury.
Right.
Does Jaden Osbury win the rover job? Is he the backup nickel? Does that change how? I mean, that's the interesting thing about it is, Jalen Sneed is a guy you kind of right now is the number one rover, but I think there's a desire to have Jalen Sneed also play some will, also play in some of the nickel packages where he's actually going to be brought inside and rush off the edge because he's actually a pretty gifted edge rusher.
Yeah, I think those one of his better qualities, actually.
Right. So those things are all that kind of go into this conversation, but you also can't move Jalen Sneed away from rover if Jaden Osbury doesn't step up and play well. Right. That's the other part of it too is, so when you talk about this battle, this is what makes the defensive battle so intriguing and so unique, at least the first few that we're talking about, because they don't just impact that position.
Right.
What happens at the field corner is going to impact the depth at boundary. It's going to impact a lot of different things. It impacts the safeties. What happens in that boundary safety battle could impact the field safety spot. There's a lot of different things that it could impact. Do you say, hey, look, we may need to move Xavier to the boundary and play these guys? I mean, there's all types of things that factor into it, and this is another one. If Jaden Osbury steps up and has a great fall camp, then that allows you to focus Jalen Sneed on more of the packages and the will spot. And he's right now kind of playing all over. I don't know if Jalen Sneed's the kind of guy that can handle playing all over.
Right.
So could that then help him be even better in the roles you're going to ask him to play this season? Like, who's the number 2 that comes off the bench when Jack Kaiser needs a breather?
Sure.
Is that going to be Kingston Viliama-Asa playing both? Is it going to be Kahanu Kia? Is it going to be Jalen Sneed? Like, that's the question. And this battle, in my opinion, is going to play a role in that, Vince, because of the things we just talked about. Because if Jaden Alsbury can really step up and like cement that Rover spot, or whatever you want to call it, the number 2 nickel, whatever the case may be.
I know, right? We don't even have a name for it anymore.
Then that's going to then impact how you use Jalen Sneed. That's the reality of it. But the other thing too is Jaden Alsbury can do some things at that position that the other Rovers just can't do in coverage. Now, he's not a guy you're going to say, okay, go cover Zachariah Branch all game. No, that's not a good idea. But can he handle most slot receivers and tight ends more effectively than what you've seen before? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that to me is a very intriguing part. We had a super chat from Rocket for Heisman.
Nice.
Could Jaden Alsbury be another Isaiah Simmons? The point being, like, Isaiah Simmons you didn't know what position he was. Is he a linebacker? Is he a safety?
Yeah.
And they would use him very differently. I don't think Notre Dame's going to do quite as many things with Jaden Alsbury as they do with that. I mean, they would have Isaiah Simmons playing like post safety. They'd have him playing like the middle of like Tampa 2 type stuff. I mean, he just played all over, and then he'd come down and play linebacker. I don't know what you're going to ask him as a redshirt freshman to do all that in 2024, but does it give you some, to his question, does it give you some flexibility to do some different things out of your base defense? Yeah. Does it give you some flexibility when you're playing? Let's just say you're playing a team that is an air raid team that runs the ball a lot and goes fast. You'd rather have your Rover in the game. Well, if you're playing a team that goes fast, you may not want to get caught with your Rover on the field, Vince, if they're going tempo and they get into a third down and those type of things, because those teams that play 3-4 receiver offenses, they don't need to sub in the middle of a play that allow you to so you don't want to get caught in that. So maybe you go nickel. But then you don't love being a nickel because on first and second down, they're going to be more prone to perimeter screens in the run game. And yeah, Jordan Clark can handle himself well there, but wouldn't you rather have a guy that's 40 pounds heavier or 30 pounds heavier that can also run? Well, when you've got a true Rover and a true nickel, and they're very different, then you kind of, first chance you get, you want to sub. A guy like Jaden Alsbury might give you some flexibility in that particular situation to say, hey, look, Jaden, you're on the field for this.
Yeah.
And we're just going to roll. And so that's going to be an interesting thing about it. But is he prepared for that kind of role? That's the question that we don't know.
It's a big step up from where he's been. I mean, that's a lot. That's a big ask. But I do believe that he is the most versatile guy, and he's the guy that I would personally want there if he can handle it. That's the guy who I want to win the job, because I do think that Jalen Sneed has value to this defense. He absolutely does. But I want him to be in more of a specific role than playing the Rover position. Does that make sense? Like like coming off the edge, like the package type stuff. I think he can be a very important part of this defense and a very integral part, and making plays and doing all these different things as a package player, maybe coming in the nickel, like you said, or, all of these different things. And so I would feel more comfortable with Jalen Sneed being that guy based on what he has done at Notre Dame so far and what I've seen from him athletically. I think that Jaden Alsbury brings more versatility to that spot and allows you to do more. Like, I'm thinking of it as a defensive coordinator and as a linebacker coach, right? I want the guy who allows my entire playbook to be open potentially, or a good deal of it without having to sub. And I think Jaden Alsbury is that guy. And I'm not sure that it's fair to make Jalen Sneed that guy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's fair to him, because I think you're putting him in a position where he's not going to succeed. So it is going to be fascinating. Again, the dominoes as to, number one, can Jaden handle that? And then number two, what happens to Mr. Sneed at that point, and how does it affect the will, and how does it affect
and
all
we,
of those
when we
things?
say what happens, it's what happens from a positive standpoint.
Oh yeah.
It's not like, well, I guess this means that we're not going to see any Jalen Sneed. I don't think it means that. It just means maybe it's like, okay, well, now we don't have to worry about using Jalen over here, because Jaden and Jordan Clark have this part locked down.
Yes.
that means we can, because like thing with Jalen Sneed is when you have him at Rover, it's the furthest away from the football he'll ever be.
Yeah.
Is Jalen Sneed a guy you want further away from the football? Jaden Osbury, I'm okay being further away from the football, very similar to what we saw from Jack Kaiser. Jack Kaiser was far away from the football a lot last year, and he tied for the team lead in solo tackles. Right. Like tells you the kind of, and Jaden Osbury has that sort of ability.
Sure.
Jalen Sneed is a guy you want attacking the football. Is he athletic enough to do coverage? Sure. But I don't want him doing that. I want him attacking the foot. If the quarterback is dropping back to pass, and I have two choices with Jalen Sneed, that's it. I can either have him cover and drop away from the quarterback, or I can have him running at the quarterback. I want him running at the quarterback.
Yes. That's where he's at his best.
But you can't necessarily do that because you don't have the depth at nickel.
Right.
If Jaden Osbury is not ready to play.
Absolutely.
That's the reality of it. If Jaden Osbury steps up and is like, Jalen, I got this. Okay, cool. Now you can use Jalen Sneed to then pin his ears back and go after the quarterback. That's a win for the defense, and it's a win for Jalen Sneed. In my opinion.
I was just going to say that is a positive domino effect because you're going to put Jalen Sneed in a much better position to be successful on this defense, and if he's in a better position to be successful, then the defense as a whole is going to be in a better position to be successful. And so I think that's best case scenario. I don't know if that's the way it's going to shake down, but that is the way I would love for it to shake down. That's for sure. No doubt about it. The next position we are going to talk about once I find my notes here, which I am struggling to do. Here we go.
It's the end position.
Defensive end. Yes, absolutely. And so we have obviously talked about defensive end an awful lot already this season. We've talked about the fact that they're going to be, if we're talking about both ends, they're going to be 3 deep at both sides in my opinion. Now, the question is going to be, what is the pecking order going to be on the edges?
Yes.
We think we know, but at the same time,
I don't think we know.
Okay, even better.
I really don't, because you think
Even
it's
better.
like, right, you think, okay, RJ Oben's the 1, and then Josh Burnham's the 2, and then, Bryce Young will be sort of that freaky, and we talked about this recently. We did a freshman show. Bryce can do it 10, 12 snaps, what a lot of people need 30, 40 to do. Yeah. Because he's just so freaky.
From a production standpoint.
Right. Yeah. But what if he's ready for 40? You know what I mean? And well, yeah, Josh Burnham, I mean, of course, RJ Oben's going to be the guy. He's a 6-year senior. He's been a 3-year starter at Duke. He's got X number of career sacks. He's got over 20 career sacks, blah, 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 blah. Okay, yeah, but what if Josh Burnham's just better? And from the things I've heard from multiple sources about the offseason that Josh Burnham's having, he may be. Right? So what does that mean? Okay, well, it may mean you still start RJ Oben. Because, look, 6-year senior, he turned down the NFL to come here. We're still going to start him. But then, okay, how are the reps going to get shaken out? Like in the fourth quarter when the game's on the line, it may be Josh in the game. It may be Art. I mean, who knows? So, the thing to me is it is kind of you're all going to play, but it's jockeying for position. And the other part, too, is, Vince, if you got these 3 guys and they are all just that good, and you're struggling at Viper, which we're going to talk about here in a second, then it's like, why am I pounding my head against the wall, trying to break down my reps between RJ Oben, who's a dude, and Josh Burnham, who's a dude, and Bryce Young, who's a dude, and this other position that's like, I'm struggling to get production from. Well, hey, RJ, you want to give Viper a shot? That kind of thing in certain pass rushing situations. Sure. And so those are aspects of it, too, that you look at, Vince, and say, again, it's the theme of this defense. It doesn't just impact this position potentially. Right. It could impact others. And no question. That's what really fascinates all these things. And then let's just do these 2 together, Vince. Yeah. Viper and N together. Yes. Because the other thing is, the other one is the backup Viper job. Look, Patelho's going to probably start unless somebody beats him out. I don't know who that's going to be right now. You've got Junior Tuihalamaka and Boubacar Traore. Now, I've very down on Junior Tuihalamaka because he just didn't do anything last year. But I loved him coming out of high school as a linebacker. He just hasn't made that transition to defensive end. Is this the season now that he's in his second full year at defensive end or at Viper that he kind of figures it out and then takes off and now he's a good player and he can give you some production? I hope so, because I like the junior coming out of high school. Boubacar Traore has ridiculous talent.
Yeah, physical attributes.
He's super far, the way this season, he was super far away from being ready. Even in the spring, we fall in love with the flashy plays, the sack he had. But there's a lot of plays where you're like, dude's not ready yet because he had the wrong gap there. Or he made himself super blockable there. It's like he's got a lot to learn. If these two guys if the battle here is a little underwhelming, then you are almost kind of like, okay, I got these three guys ripping it up at end, and I'm struggling to find out what we're doing over here. You got a couple options. One, you can go more of a 3-3 look. We're just not going to keep pounding our head against the wall. We're just going to go 3-3 and take the Viper off the field and go with Riley Mills and RJ or Burnham and Young and have Howard at nose. And then we're going to go with Kaiser and Drake and, Jalen Sneed or Kingston or somebody else at linebacker.
They're deep at linebacker.
Yep. Sure. Yeah. Or, hey, we've got these three guys at end who are balling. Yeah. Let's move one of them over to Viper. And Josh Burnham played it last year. So, that's kind of where we're at. So, yeah.
But having 6 guys for 2 spots is crazy depth. Crazy depth.
It also, in my opinion, Vince, widens your margin for error.
Sure.
Because it's not like, man, if Josh Burnham doesn't break out, they're in trouble. And look, that's been the story at Notre Dame for quite a while, until very recently, where it's like 2 years ago, if Isaiah Foskey gets hurt, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
If Khalid Kareem goes down, what made that 2018 D-line so good? If Khalid Kareem goes down, you're putting in Adi Kanduba Ogundiji. If Julian Okwara goes down, you're putting in Dalen Hayes or Jameer Jones. They had 7 D linemen playing the NFL from that 2018 D-line.
That's crazy.
Actually, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. 8 D linemen. Because you had, it's 8. But the point being, I'm going. I was like, dude, don't go on that tangent. Just stay on track, Brian. Don't do that to yourself.
Stay right here. Put the blinders on.
Right. But when you look at it, that's where you really want to be. Yeah. Whereas a couple years ago, it's like, if Riley Mills goes down, who are you going to play at big end? It's like, nah, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And if a couple years ago, and this is why Josh Burnham and Jr. had to move, because if Isaiah Foskey goes down, you're like, I don't know who else you're going to put in the game. Not only who's ready, I don't know who you have at that position. Right, where now it's like, okay, if Botelho doesn't play well, you've got Junior. If Junior doesn't play well, you got Boubacar. If Boubacar doesn't play, maybe Logan Thomas at 225 pounds if he's healthy. I've heard some things about Logan Thomas from an explosiveness standpoint that people are like, if that kid can hold up physically, he's going to be a dude, because there aren't many guys that are as explosive off the first step. I'm like, you guys were just saying that about Boubacar a year ago. And they're like, exactly. You know what I mean? Like, that's what they're adding to the table. I still think Logan's probably a year away from being like a regular. Maybe he can find like a pass rushing role this year, but being like a regular. But it's such a different situation. In where it's like, okay, if RJ gets hurt, okay, you've got Burnham, you've got Bryce Young. If Burnham goes down and you're number 2 or number 1, okay, guess we're gonna have to slide in our 5-star true freshman who's 6'7", 250. I guess we're gonna have to put that guy in the game. You know what I mean? It's such a different situation to be in from where they were in the past.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be an interesting aspect there to me with this battle, is how it impacts everything. But it's kind of like, to be honest with you, I'm not worried about the defensive end positions. And I know some people are, but I'm like, I'm not, because when you're as loaded as they are, someone's going to step up. You got 6 guys battling. You could throw in a 7th in Logan Thomas, who's really talented. I would love to see Notre Dame move Brennan Vernon back out to end, honestly. Put him back out there. And now you're talking about, you got 8 guys that are pretty talented players. You only need 4 of them to play in something. You only really need 2 to be impact guys, and you only need 4 to be good players. That's what's happening at other schools, right? Like, that's what happens at Bama. It's not, we got this one guy, and if he doesn't pan out, we're screwed. It's just a different animal now at Notre Dame. Now, that's from a playing standpoint. Now what these guys all have to prove is, can you provide the impact production that's needed?
Right.
It's a very talented group. I'm just confident that's going to happen because of what we've seen from all these guys in the past.
Right.
That's kind of where I'm at with this one, Vince.
So the last topic that we kind of want to talk about when it comes to position battles and things of that nature, right, are pretty much the domino effect of all of these positions. Who's going to end up being the twos, the depth, because defense is about rotating. I mean, we talked
this defense especially.
We've talked in the past, like you could see 11 defensive linemen in any game, I think. And so what is that going to look like at linebacker? What is that going to look like at defensive line? What is that going to look like in the secondary? We've kind of touched on the secondary a little bit, but more linebacker, defensive line. Like, what is this depth going to look like? And there's a lot of names of guys that can contribute this year, I think.
Yeah, and we won't spend a lot of time on this, Vince, but this is an exciting thing for me. And I told Vince this before the show. It's not so much from positions, but like, what does Kingston do? Does he force himself onto the field this year? Does Kahanu Kia build on what he did in the spring and really take that step and he forces his way on the field? You know, where's Jalen Steed going to find his rollout on defense? Does Luke Talich make a run? Does one of the freshman corners push? Does Chance Tucker, does the light finally go on for Chance Tucker? Does Leonard Moore come in? And I've heard some really good things about Leonard Moore.
Oh, wow.
Does he kind of come in and be that guy and prove himself to be that guy? You know, does Carson Hobbs say, hey, look, I can be that. You don't have a backup nickel? Let me be that backup nickel, right? I mean, there's so many different things that are going to come into play here on defense, Vince. Does you talk about you're going to have Gabriel Rubio and Jason Onya, your next two D tackles. Well, what is Donovan Heinisch going to do? Is he going to push his way onto the field more? Does Armel Mukam bounce back from his injury and come out and say, hey, you need to figure out a role for me? Does Devin Houston do that? You know, does a Brendan Vernon do that? Does a Logan Thomas do that? Does a Boubacar Traore do that? There's so many talented young players that right now it's like, okay, I don't want to just focus all the time on the freshmen and sophomores because those guys are usually going to be a smaller number of your impact players, but they're so talented that you're curious, like, well, who are going to be those guys though? Who will be the freshmen and sophomores that kind of forced around the field? And that's kind of what's going to make this. I mean, I'm actually more intrigued by that going into fall camp than I am by which one of these two guys that's both going to play is going to start.
Right.
And that's a little bit different. Like, you know, if Rocco wins a left guard job, he's the dude. If Pat Coogan wins it, he's the dude. Like, there is no, you know, whereas now it's like, okay, they're both going to play. It's like, that was my response. Well, how's this going to shake out? Well, they're both going to play. How's this one going to shake out? Well, they're both going to play.
Right.
Because that's what Notre Dame does, Vince. They throw waves at you. Mm-hmm. They couldn't do that in the past because they didn't have waves to throw.
Right. It's
like the first one's a wave and the next one's like, okay, now it's time for the ripple. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't have a second wave. You know what I mean? Like, you know, the first wave, it's like what you get when you throw like a big boulder into the ocean. And the second one's like when you throw like a little pebble. You know, there just wasn't the depth. There wasn't that impact depth. Now they have impact depth where you could argue at certain positions, your backups are more physically talented than your starters at a lot of – if Christian Gray's not starting, he's your most physically gifted cornerback is on the bench. Or not on the bench, is not a starter.
Right.
It's most likely that your three most – actually, you could argue your four most physically gifted defensive ends won't start. Josh Burnham, Bryce Young, Logan Thomas, Boubacar Traore won't start.
They're all going to play, though.
Right. You know, one of your – you're going to have a you know, people get into the Kingston versus Drake thing. Well, okay, let's say it's an either or. Whoever starts, the dude behind him is going to be really talented sitting on the bench.
Right.
Right now, it's not an either or; it's a both and because of the. But that's the thing is, what does Kingston prove himself ready to do? Does he start at Mike? Meaning like the position he's going to play. Does he just start out at Mike and he's the backup to Drake? You know, does Drake goes down? Does he step in? Maybe he pushes Drake. Who knows? We'll see how that goes.
Right.
Or does he prove himself ready to say, hey, look, dude, I can help a Mike. I can help a Will. Dude, coach, I can do whatever. I've got this defense down. I can play both. And factor in that way. Does Rod Hurd make a real smooth transition where he can help you at boundary, field, and nickel? Okay, you got your backup nickel snaps now because Rod Hurd can handle that in a pin.
Because he's been a nickel for almost his entire career.
Right.
So, yeah.
So those are the interesting aspects of this whole thing, in my opinion, Vince, is and how deep can you go? Because that's the other problem. You're getting to the point now on defense where it's like, okay, you got to be careful. Because you can't go too deep where nobody gets into a rhythm.
Right.
True. And nobody gets into the flow of the game. And that's something that's going to factor into that in a big, big way, in my opinion.
Well, either way, this is going to be a top defense in the country, a top defense in the country with the chance of being elite. And a lot of it's going to come down to how they figure out what these rotations are going to be. It's who is going to be on the field the most, who's going to be on the field at crunch time. All of those factors are what this defensive staff needs to figure out in fall camp to make sure that this defense is competing at an elite level, because they've got the talent to do it. It's finding that mix, that recipe of success. Those, hey, Xavier plays really well when Rod is on the field, or, and those are just two names that I picked. Xavier will play well no matter who's on the field, but finding those combinations of who plays well together. I think linebacker is a perfect example of that. Does Drake Bowen play better when Jalen Snead is on the field, or when Jack Kaiser is on the field, or when Kingston is on the field? What's the best combination there, or whatever, right? And so that recipe it's going to be a finely tuned recipe that this coaching staff is going to have to figure out. And from a former coaching mind, and from from somebody that covers the team, that's going to be fascinating to kind of watch and keep track of, and who is going to be in crunch time at Texas A&M on the road, hostile environment, games on the line, that kind of a thing. All of this is going to be absolutely fascinating. And Notre Dame has the talent on this roster to make it fascinating. It's not one or, it's okay, who's going to be out there making plays. So I'm excited about it. I'm really excited about it.
That's great.
All right. So, hey, thanks for hanging out with us for the defensive position battles. We've still got some more. We got a lot more to come. But before we get to it, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends. Jump on the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
Before we move on to section 3, I have a couple comments I have to make.
Uh-oh.
Number one is to the new Michigan fan that we have on our chat today.
Oh, boy.
First of all, I want to make clear, this channel is open to fans of all teams. We have Ohio State fans in here. We have LSU fans in here. Antoine is our long-term resident Michigan fan in here. Number one, if you're going to come to this chat, be respectful, right? Number two, have a clue what you're talking about. Number two. And number three, where were you? Because he's here because of the Ivan Taylor thing, right?
Of course.
Where were you when we did a show about Will Black committing Notre Dame over Michigan? Where were you when we did the Matty Augustine commitment when he picked him over Michigan? Where were you when Christopher Burgess did his commitment show and he picked him over Michigan? Where were you when Ethan Long picked Notre Dame over Michigan? Where were you when Mark Zachary picked Notre Dame over Michigan? And where were you on Friday when Jadon Blair committed to Michigan, or to Notre Dame over Michigan, which is the only reason you even have Ivan Taylor in the first place? Okay, so you know what I like about Antoine? Antoine would be here whether Michigan got a guy or not. He comes in here respect, and he'll argue his pro-Michigan stance, and we respect the heck out of him for it.
Yep.
But if you're going to come here with talking about, like, here's the thing. You have to get out of your football-only mindset. Where's Notre Dame going to go if the ACC goes away? Why does Notre Dame have to make a football conference decision for sports that don't play football? You ever heard of the Big East? Notre Dame was in the Big East a lot longer than they were in the ACC. They don't need the Big Ten for basketball, or because the only sport they need the Big Ten for, they're already in the freaking Big Ten for. It's called hockey.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't need it for men's and women's basketball. And you also might want to be careful, because there's some sports in Notre Dame, they're going to come over to the Big Ten and dominate you day one. The ACC made that mistake with women's basketball. No, we're going to be good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Understand the dynamic. Be willing to be, if you're going to come into a Notre Dame channel, at least be open-minded enough to hear the points that we're making. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's all we ask. Hey, why don't you guys want to be at Big Ten? We'll explain it to you. And it's not an saying Notre Dame doesn't need the Big Ten is not why all the Big Ten hate. It has nothing to do with hate. Like, we're not 5-year-olds here. It makes no sense for Notre Dame to join the Big Ten right now.
There's no
reason for it.
They don't need it.
There's no reason for it. Now, you could say, will the NBC contract result in Notre Dame playing some more Big Ten teams? We've said this. We hope so.
Yeah.
It just doesn't need to be Michigan. And when you're going to talk about, well, Michigan holds the all-time record, and you're just ignore the fact that half of Michigan's wins came before the 20th century even started, you're not really having it. You're just coming in flamethrowing. You're not actually having to trying to have a real football conversation. If you want to come in here and you're a Michigan fan, we welcome you. If you're going to have grown-up conversations, if you're just going to hurl bombs into the chat, we don't have time for that, right? So have an honest conversation about it. Number two, to the Notre Dame fans that think that Notre Dame has to join a conference because they want that bye, let me ask you a question. What scenario is better for Notre Dame, Vince? Being in a Big Ten. Let's join the Big Ten because we want a chance for the bye. Okay. So you want to give up a home game sooner where you're going to play the 10, 11, 12 seed at home. You want to not play that game because you want to play a neutral site field against Ohio State, Oregon, or Michigan because you think it gives you a better chance to play in a bye week. So your options are play Florida State, Clemson in the ACC, or Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, or Oregon in the Big Ten so you can get a bye to the quarters. You think that makes more sense than not being in a conference,
getting your bye,
a 5 to 7 seed.
Yeah.
Your bye comes from the conference title game, and you get to play a 7 to 12 or a 10 to 12 seeded team. Then you got to win that game. And now you have a warm-up 8 or 9 days before the quarterfinals. It just, the lack of depth of thought of some of this blows my mind. What you don't get a bye. The option isn't join a conference and get a bye. The option is if you join a conference, you're still playing a 13th game.
Right.
Instead of the 13th game coming against the first or second best team in that league, you may play the 4th or 5th best team in a league or a group of 5 team.
At home.
At home.
Not in Indianapolis or wherever
the
conference championship is played.
Exactly. Yeah. It makes no sense to me that people actually make that argument. I would rather play. I want to get the bye. So I'd rather have to play Oregon on a neutral field or Ohio State on a neutral field as opposed to playing the 4th best SEC team on our field or the group of 5 team at our place
in December.
As a warm-up for the quarters.
Right.
Like, instead, you'd rather, and then let's say you beat Oregon or Ohio State. Cool. You get the bye. Now you get to sit at home while another team is playing a game and getting back into rhythm, and then you got a month between games, and you got to play some team coming off of a hard-fought battle last week, and they're now primed and ready to go.
And most likely it was at home, and they got to sleep in their own beds.
Right.
And, I mean,
because you know what it is? People look at, well, in the NFL, your bye, you're still at home. Right. But you're still at home in the next round.
That's true.
That's not so your bye is I got to go down to Orlando and play Florida State, who just beat somebody in the Orange Bowl. That sounds like a good idea to you? So, yeah, it's just, you guys, you got to think through this a little bit. Notre Dame's not playing. They're going to play 13 games. Your thing is, do you want to play a conference title game against a much better opponent, or do you want to play a 10 to 12 seed at your place? And then you get some time to prep for that next game. Like, come on. Let's use our heads a little bit on this one, okay? Because this is the best. And what if Notre Dame's got to play on the road? Then they weren't going to be playing for a conference championship.
Exactly. I was just going to make that exact point. Then they weren't going to be playing in the conference championship because nobody that is that low of a seed is going to be playing in the conference championship. Yep. So what was the point of being in the conference in the first place?
Right. If you're a 10 to 12, if you're a Big Ten team and you're a 10 to 12 seed, you're at best the 3rd best team in your league. You're not playing for the conference championship.
Right. And so what was the point?
Right.
So now the pro conference people are like, well, if you're in a conference, you have a chance at the bye. Well, we just debunked that. So if you don't get the bye and you're a lower seeded team, then what was the point of being in the conference? Money. All about the money.
Notre Dame what if you win the ACC and you're the 4 seed? And now in your next round, you got to play the next best team that would have probably been a 3rd or 2nd or 3rd or 4th ranked team because like the 2nd best SEC team. Or let's say Notre Dame joins the ACC, the 2nd best Big Ten team, as opposed to being the 5 seed playing the 12, which is probably group of 5 team. And then the next round, you get the Big 12 or the ACC winner who's ranked behind you at the end of the season anyway.
Right. They just happen to get the top
Right.
4 seeds and the quote unquote bye.
How does that make sense to you that that's a better plan than staying independent and going this way? It just makes no sense.
Because going into the quarters, bottom line, people, going into the quarters, you are going to play a team that has played 13 games. You, as Notre Dame, have played 13 games. Equal number of games. You both got a bye because Notre Dame gets their bye during the conference championship.
Right.
So where's the advantage of being in the conference?
There isn't one.
I don't see it.
And here's the reality.
Competitively.
If every school in the country could go independent, set their own schedule, still make $60 million a year in TV money, they would. The reason Michigan is in the league, because they have to be in a league.
Right.
And that's ultimately what pisses people off.
Exactly.
They don't like the fact that Notre Dame gets to be independent, gets to be is the way they say it, when in reality, the last time Notre Dame won a title, there was 30 plus independent teams. Notre Dame didn't change. They all joined conferences because they had to.
Right.
Because nobody would give Florida State their own TV deal.
They needed the money.
Nobody would give West Virginia their own TV deal. Nobody would give Penn State their own TV deal. If Ohio State or Michigan could get the money they're making now in a conference by going out and being independent, they would jump at it. They would jump at it. But they don't. They can't. So their fan base doesn't understand that it's not a shot at the Big Ten. It's not a shot at the ACC. It's why should they do that? Why? Explain to me why they should do that. It makes no sense.
And you also have to be able to academically and mentally be able to separate football from the rest of the sports. Because all those schools that are part of the conference expansion and all of that, they weren't thinking about the other sports. They're thinking about football.
That's right.
They're thinking about football money. Notre Dame thinks about football and they think about their other sports.
Right.
Their other sports need a conference, and they've accepted that, and that's fine, right? Football doesn't. Those are two separate entities.
Right. And Notre Dame doesn't need to choose a football conference for the rest of their sports.
Correct.
The Big East would gladly take
in a heartbeat.
Notre Dame sports.
And guess what? The Big East is competitive in a lot of those other sports.
That's right.
And they would be just fine with all of their other sports.
You're telling me Notre Dame doesn't want to reignite the UConn women's basketball rivalry?
Right.
You know, one of the only sports and women's sports that makes money. You know, like come on, guys.
Yeah. So it's just,
and you don't think being at having Notre Dame in the league wouldn't increase the value the next time that the Big East has a TV contract? They're not making a ton of money from the ACC anyway.
Good call.
You know, so I mean, it just, you know, people just don't understand it, and that's fine. I mean, look, you can say they should be in, but
have a good reason. Don't just say to get a bye, because that's not thinking about the entire scenario.
Right. So. And if you're just going to keep talking out of your hind parts, you just won't let you talk in the chat anymore. That's basically what it is.
At the end of the day, we have control over that.
So at least have enough like grown-upness to you to be willing to at least engage the conversation.
Right.
And so far, the dude is not willing to engage the conversation.
Is this a Notre Dame fan or is it a Michigan fan?
This is a Michigan fan.
Oh, okay. Because
who wasn't here for all the commitments that Notre Dame has dominated Michigan.
Yeah.
Never heard from the dude.
Right.
But now they get Ivan Taylor because they beat Michigan for Jadon Blair.
Right.
And he's in here running his mouth the whole thing, making no sense. Like he's giving Antoine a bad name. Really what it boils down to.
Am I not mistaken that let's say there were 3 safeties that had Michigan and Notre Dame. Notre Dame won 2 of them. And
only lost the third because they won the other 2.
Right.
Right.
It's okay. Just wanted to make sure I had my facts straight. There's 609 now comments that I have not read, so I don't know who's
smart
going nuts over there.
So anyway, that's all I needed to say about that.
Appreciate that.
We can move on to the next topic.
Let's talk about the all-opponent team. Okay, so you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, Brian, going through rosters and stats and all these different things. And it's not an easy task because of all the transfers. And the rosters don't look the same as they looked at the end of last year. Right. And I'm looking right here at quarterback and it's a transfer student. So, a lot of work went into this. And so what we're going to do is we are going to go position by position. We're going to start with offense, and we're going to go first team, second team, position by position, the best players that Notre Dame faces. So the 12 opponents that Notre Dame has. So in theory, there were 12 players that Brian looked at, okay, for each position. Now, wide receiver, obviously, there's more. I mean, come on, common sense again, people. Let's do that.
I did go quarterback, running back, 3 receivers on offense, and then I went basically with a 4-2-5 on defense.
Okay, so we got 11 personnel on offense, and we got a 4-2-5 on defense.
That's right.
So, which is probably what you would run if you were running a team. So,
well, and when you're like, there's no way I'm finding two running backs for both teams. There's no way I'm finding that. You know what I mean? So yeah, we're gonna go.
Yeah, no, totally get that. So we're gonna go position by position. We're gonna break it down. We're gonna go first team, second team. We'll do offense, and then we will do defense. Yeah. So without further ado, let's start at the top. We'll start with
I want to go with kind of my overall thoughts on the offense.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I apologize. So. Yep,
that was a late addition to the.
I printed out the sheet.
That's on me.
And I covered my notes with the sheet, so that didn't help me. So writing notes was a waste of my time. So yes, overall thoughts of the offensive group that you have gone through that Notre Dame is going.
It's not strong. It's not strong. And it's interesting. Ryan and I were chatting about this because I was kind of complaining to Ryan. I was like, dude, I'm having a hard time finding players at certain positions that I even feel like I could find second team guards, just none of them are that good. Yeah. At least as of right now. So it's like, yeah, I'm not even going to waste my time putting on there. But it's like, and you think about like quarterback. So like 2 years ago, we would have been saying, okay, who's better on the schedule? Caleb Williams, CJ Stroud, or Drake May, right? A number 1, a number 2, and a number 3 overall draft pick at quarterback in the last 2 years. Now it's like, okay, who's number 1? Is it DJ Uiagalelei? Is it Haynes King? Or is it Connor Wegman? Or maybe the kid from Miami of Ohio who's been around forever, the Gabbert kid.
Like, younger brother.
It's like, man, it is not the same kind of deal as it was 2 years ago. And running back and receiver. Now, receiver's interesting overall, Vince, because there's a lot of talent, but a lot of it's unproven. And so I think that my feeling on running back and receiver is going to probably be different after the season than coming in. But there's a lot of question marks. And then overall, just up front, there's not a lot of good offensive linemen on the schedule that I can see. And so it's when you look at it, it's not and you think about some of the receivers Notre Dame has played. Like Ohio State's starting lineup 2 years ago would be my first team group of receivers right now. Like I'd have Marvin, I'd have Emeka, and then maybe one of my receivers now. And then so it's, you had Josh Downs 2 years ago. Yeah, Jordan Addison was transferring to USC after winning the Biletnikoff at Pitt. I mean, it was some loaded skill. And now you look at it and you're thinking like, man, there's just not a lot of good talent that's coming back. Some guys will step up, and I'm sure some guys will get better, but we're going to have to find out kind of how that is. So that's just an observation that I had about the offensive skill right now. Some of these positions, as I said, I do anticipate seeing some change during the season, but it's like, who's that going to be? I'm not quite sure. Like there's like going into 2022, and Archer can attest to this. I don't think he's in the chat today, but he can attest to this. Marvin Harrison wasn't the dude yet going into 2022. It was a sophomore. It was going into a sophomore year. And as a freshman, he'd shown promise, but he hadn't done a whole lot yet. He had 11 catches for 139 yards and 3 touchdowns. But you knew going into that season that he was going to be a dude that year because obviously, Jackson Smith and Jigba was gone. He was stepping into a starting role. He was stepping into a primary role. Garrett Wilson was gone. Chris Olave was gone. Actually, Jackson Smith and Jigba was coming back. It was Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave that were gone. Jackson was supposed to be your guy, but you knew Marvin was going to be really good as well. And then when Jackson got hurt, Emeka Egbuka steps up. He does very well. But you kind of knew certain guys were going to be really good. When you look at it this year, I don't know that there's that potential breakout guy outside of one player, which I'll get into, who is on my first team. So it is going to be very fascinating to see if there are changes in evolution, because I look at the Notre Dame defense and it's stacking up against some of these teams, and you start getting a little bit excited about what they can be. So we'll start at quarterback. And as I mentioned, this is a position where there's been a lot of change. And I mean, even I'm looking at my list, and actually two of my first and second team guys are guys that transferred. One guy transferred in this year, the other guy transferred in last year. So my first team quarterback is honestly, just because of steadiness, it's DJ Uiagalelei. And, look, he's a guy that passed for 2,600 yards last year, 21 touchdowns, 7 picks, ran for 219 yards, had 6 touchdowns. He's not flashy. He's not the 5-star people thought he was going to be, but he's won a lot of football games in his career. Won a lot of games at Clemson, won a lot of games last year at Oregon State. He's a good football player. And the reality is when you look at him compared to my second team quarterback, who was actually more productive, and that's Haynes King, he had 2,800 yards passing last year, 737 yards rushing.
That's a lot.
27 passing touchdowns, 10 rushing touchdowns. We threw 16 interceptions.
That's also a lot.
And so that kind of factored in. Now, the wild card here is Connor Wegman. A lot of people in the chat, I would imagine, if you were doing it, you'd say, well, what about Connor Wegman? Postseason, all opponent team, I kind of think there's a good chance maybe that Connor Wegman becomes that guy. Connor Wegman's played 9 games of college football in 2 years because he's been hurt. So the big thing for me is I think Connor Wegman's a good football player. I think he's a very talented football player. Vince, you remember me talking about him coming out of high school. I liked the kid quite a bit. But I got to see the guy play more than 9 games in 2 years before I'm going to get too fired up about it. And he's only started, I think, 8 games. And so far in his career, he's shown a lot of promise. He started 4 games last year before he got hurt. In 2 of those games, he was over 300 yards passing against Miami, Florida, and Louisiana Monroe. There's a lot of talent there. He's a pretty mobile kid too. I just need to see him play a full season first. If you were to tell me that I'm going to guarantee you that Connor Wegman is going to be healthy all year, I'd say, okay, cool. He'll probably be my first team quarterback. But he hasn't even shown me he can play half a year yet.
That's true. Yeah.
And so I need to see him do that first. So I'm going with DJ. I'm going with the safe pick.
Okay.
First and foremost. And then the 2 upside kids, one's the second team, the other guy's sort of my wild card. And I have another wild card on offense as well in the offensive line, which I'll get into. But so Connor Wegman is not on there for me just because I just need to see him play more. That's going to be a big key.
I think that's fair. And, the one national highlight that we have is him missing the moving dummy. So he didn't look very good. But he did make the finals. So
Connor Wegman?
Yeah, the man.
He's a very talented kid. He's a very talented kid. But I just
you saw that clip though, right?
Like, oh yeah.
But he was in the finals, so
that's the thing that sucks about just see a clip because you're like, wow, what a terrible throw. But you're like, well, he didn't get there with those similar type of throws. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't in the final round because he threw a bunch of wounded ducks throughout the time. He's a talented player. I'm just and look, there's some projection to successful seasons by guys on my first and second team. This isn't an all-star team made up of what guys did last year. But when and that's why I was explaining the Marvin Harrison thing from 2 years ago. Kid came into the 2022 season with 11 catches, but he would have been on your first or second team all opponent team because you knew he was going to be really good.
Yeah.
But at quarterback, I just need to see if Connor's healthy. I know he'll be very good, but I just need to see if he can be healthy. There's a difference between that and a guy that's talented but just doesn't have a lot of experience.
Let's jump to running back. Again, you have a 1 running back set here. So we're just talking 1 first team, 1 second team. Where are we going with running back? And they're actually kind of a surprising second teamer, in my opinion.
Is not a strong running back position. And I'll explain why I don't have I'm not projecting here. So number 1, my first team running back is Jamal Haynes from Georgia Tech. I actually really like this kid. And look, Georgia Tech has a team that their defense is a mess. That's why I'm not overly concerned about Notre Dame I'm not overly concerned about Notre Dame losing that game because I just think Notre Dame will outscore them. But this could be an offense that presents as much problems as anybody outside of Louisville, maybe USC and Florida, even more than Florida State, just because of what the known commodities of what they have coming back. No matter a quarterback that's coming back that accounted for 37 touchdowns and over 3,500 yards last year. When you got a running back in Jamal Haynes coming back who rushed for 1,059 yards last year, averaged 6.1 yards per carry, and had 7 touchdowns. So that's a kid that's got some ability. That's a kid that's got that has got production at a Power 5 level. And so when I see that, it's like, okay, that to me is the no-brainer. The no-brainer pick for me for first team of the guys coming back. Now, there's some guys, some younger players that have a little bit of ability that you can maybe pop up in there and say could have some success. But when I look at this kid, I mean, look, Vince, even against like Georgia, he had 15 carries for 81 yards. That's 5.4 yards per carry. Against Georgia at Clemson, on the road at Clemson, 15 carries, 104 yards. That's 6.9 per carry. So this isn't a kid that just pumped up his stats against teams that aren't very good. This is a kid that had some games and against some very good football teams. And Notre Dame didn't have a 100-yard rusher against Clemson. Jamal Haynes did. Right now, of course, if the game was close, Audric would have gone over 100 because he had 82 at halftime. You know what I mean? But you get the point that I'm making.
Yes, I do.
So, he's a kid that I look at, Vince, and I'm like, okay, that's a guy that's got some ability, in my opinion, of being a good football player.
Your second team guy, I think that's where you're headed, right? Your second team guy is going to be a guy that I'm guessing a lot of fans probably don't know a whole lot about because of the team that he plays for, but the team that he plays for is pretty good for their level. Right. And this kid had a really good season last year, almost 1,300 yards on the ground.
He did. And he's also a kid that I believe, I'm trying to look it up now, I believe he transferred in from an SEC school.
Okay.
I believe. I'm actually looking that up right now, Vince. I believe he did. I thought he signed with South Carolina coming out of high school. But he's a kid that's played a bunch of football, too, first of all. It's Arterio Brown from Northern Illinois. He's from Georgia. He rushed for 538 yards and 6.6 yards per carry as a true freshman. As a freshman. Also had over 100 yards in a bowl game against Coastal Carolina that year. In 2022, he missed a couple games, but he still ran for 689 yards and 7 touchdowns, 6.3 per carry. And then last year, he stayed healthy and rushed for 1,296 yards and 10 touchdowns, averaged 6.1 yards per carry. Had 132 yards in a bowl game. Kid that had some very good production last year and is a good football player. Offensive line's solid, not great, so he didn't play as well in some of the Power 5 schools, but it's kind of like you put that kid behind the Notre Dame offensive line, and he runs better against Nebraska and Boston College than he did when he had Northern Illinois guys blocking for him. So I actually thought about putting him on my first team, but the fact is his numbers against Power 5 teams weren't great, and Jamal Haynes had his best games against Power 5 teams. So that's really what it came down to for me, Vince, was that reality right there. So I went with Jamal Haynes 1, Arterio Brown 2. There's a couple other guys I considered. Woody Marks, who transferred to USC from Mississippi State. He's a guy that I could see being on there. He's just never run for, I think, over 600 yards. Because Mississippi State's been that real heavy pass, air raid type team. He's a good back. I think he'll fit that system relatively well. Texas A&M has a few backs that are kind of in conversation. And then we talked about one of the kids last week. Obviously, a lot of people are going to talk about Ruben Owens, who was a highly ranked recruit. I was never a big Ruben Owens fan, to be honest with you. I think he's more athletic than he is talented. Amari Daniels is a kid that, rushed for 532 yards for them last year, only 5.1 per carry, 6 touchdowns. Le'Veon Moss, is a talented player that, I considered. But none of those guys have shown enough to me yet to say they're going to project and be better than the 2 kids that are there, in my opinion. And then Louisville would have had a guy on this. Penny Boone would have been my first team guy. He's the kid that transferred from Toledo to Louisville in the offseason, but then he transferred out, and he's now at UCF. So that shook things up a little bit at running back.
This is where it gets interesting for me, just because you had to find 6 wide receivers.
It wasn't actually that hard.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So 6 wide receivers. You got 3 on the first team, 3 on the second team. Is there, obviously there's a clear delineation first team.
Only
team,
2 of them were transfers, by the way.
Okay. All right. So was there like hey, these 2 guys are like way up here, and then it was kind of a drop? Like what is your delineation? 3
were all pretty easy. Like there was more debate for me for who was going to be on the second team than who was going to be on the first team.
Cool.
My first, and there was 2 no-brainers on offense that were me at receiver, and then the third guy was a bit of a projection, but I don't think anyone's going to disagree with it. Okay. So my first guy was Colin Lacey, who from Louisville, who transferred in from South Alabama. Last year at South Alabama, he caught 91 passes for 1,316 yards and 7 touchdowns. Now, your thing is, well, okay, he did that at South Alabama. Very true, but we've also used that same argument for Chris Mitchell, right? So then you say, okay, well, how did he do against the better schools that he played? Okay, well, he played at Oklahoma State last year, a team that played for the Big 12 title, and he had 5 catches for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. He played at James Madison last year, who was one of the 2 or 3 best Group of 5 schools, a team that went 11-2 last year. He had 6 catches for 132 yards. So you could argue those are the 2 best teams that they played last year, and he was really good in those games. So he's very talented. If you haven't seen his highlights yet, check him out. He's a really good football player. I think he's coming to Louisville to put up big numbers and hopefully improve his draft stock by being a little bit more marketable. Not an super like fast guy, but really athletic, really shifty, but he knows how to get open. He knows how to win. He's just a good football player. The other receiver that was a no-brainer was Alec Ayamanor, the kid from Stanford. Notre Dame saw him firsthand last year. Travis Hunter still has nightmares about what he did to him in their matchup last season where he had over 200 yards receiving against Travis Hunter.
Travis Hunter.
Yes, he did.
Man.
Yes, he did. And so he finished the year with 62 catches, 1,013 yards, 16.3 per catch, and then 6 touchdowns. So he's another. He if I'm putting a receiving group together, he's my boundary guy.
Sure.
Right? Colin Lacey would be my field, my Z. But big kid, big-bodied kid, good athlete, understands body positioning, control, all that kind of stuff. Notre Dame did a good job of shutting him down last year, but not a lot of other people had success shutting him down. Obviously, his stats were somewhat padded on the season by what he did against Colorado. He had 294 yards receiving in that game, but he had 2 other 100-yard games, Vince, and they were against good teams. He had 9 catches for 146 yards and a touchdown against Washington in a game they lost by 9. That was a competitive football game. Stanford, you never thought Stanford was going to win, but they hung around for 4 quarters, and that offense moved the ball up and down the field on Washington that day. And then on the road, he had 3 catches for 122 yards against Oregon State, who had a pretty darn good secondary last year. He also, against Notre Dame, had 7 catches for 58 yards. Notre Dame largely shut him down. All his catches were like real quick throws against off coverage, but they shut him down. They did a pretty good job of shutting him down last year. So he was my number 2. Those are the 2 easy ones, Vince.
He got a lot of his yards against Colorado, which I totally get. Their defense was awful, but they had one pretty good defensive player. Now, was he injured at that point or coming back from the injury? He was just
coming back from the injury, which is why and they threw him out there and played him both ways.
Yeah.
The kid hadn't played in a month, and they asked him to play both ways in this matchup.
But that's why this happens. Like, you can't expect a kid to be dominant on both sides of the ball for an entire game. You just can't, especially coming off the kind of injury that he had where he didn't play for a month.
Right.
But that's the coaching. So.
Right. But this is still a good football player. So maybe he would have only had 8 catches for 130 yards in that game.
That's what I'm saying. Like
that's why I point to the other 2 games. He ripped up Washington. He ripped up Oregon State on the road. Those are good secondaries that we respected, had good defenses last year to some degree. And so that to me is like, okay, if you don't want to put too much on that one game, I get that. But look what he did over here. Right. He had over 100 yards, over 130. What did I say, Vince?
Yeah, you said 3 catches for
146 on 9 catches.
9 catches.
Against the national runners-up. Right? I mean, who's starting corner transferred to Oregon is one of the reasons people think Oregon's going to have a great defense.
Right.
So that's Jabbar Muhammad. So he's a good football player. And then my third receiver, this is the projection pick because my third receiver only had 31 catches for 320 yards last year and 2 touchdowns. That's Zachariah Branch from USC. I think this is actually kind of a no-brainer for me as well. But it is projection, right? I am projecting it because you look at those numbers and he doesn't have, top all-opponent team numbers. But when you watch him as a kick returner, he was extremely explosive last year as a kick returner. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we saw that last season. He averaged 22 yards per punt return on 15 returns. So it's not like he had like one long return against Notre Dame. He had 15 returns, and he still averaged over 22 yards per return, including a touchdown last season. And then let me just point this out too. He had against Notre Dame, he had the 4 for 86, 3 for 59 against Utah, 2 for 80 against Stanford, 3 for 66 against San Jose State, and then 1 for 23 against Louisville in the bowl game. So, I mean, he was dynamic in all those areas. And then as a kick returner, he averaged only 18.4 per return because USC's coverage teams were trash, but he did have a 96-yard return last year. He's a very dynamic player. And so as a receiver, when he got hurt in the kind of early in the year, he never quite came back into the rotation the way you'd expect it. He only had 2 catches against Notre Dame, 1 against Utah. This is after he missed 2 games, 1 against Utah, 1 against Cal, 3 against Washington for 16 yards, only 4 for 21 against Oregon, only 2 for 9. They threw like a lot of quick stuff to him. But you look at him in the first 4 games, he went 4-1, 4-4, and 58, 22, 30, 68. So a little bit more production before the injury. And then, of course, they had a lot of receivers last year. Not a lot of good ones, but a lot of receivers last year. And he just was never quite used the same. He will be this year. Him and Deuce Robinson are both going to me, be really impact players this year for them. So he was an easy pick for me to be on my first team, even though it is a pure projection pick. But there's nobody on this list, first or second team, that brings this kid's athleticism to the table. We joke about the punter catching him, and I'm like, God, he had the angle. Right, this kid's dynamic. This kid's really dynamic, and I think he's going to have he's going to be one of those breakout dudes for that. As long as he can stay healthy, that's my only concern about Zachariah Branch. He's not a real big guy, and the way that USC plays their offense, he takes a lot of hits.
Yeah,
so that's my only concern about him. But I think he's going to be really good.
Second team wide receiver, we got 3 more guys. Looking at their stats, I would say a little bit of projection here for one of the guys, and a Virginia receiver that you may not be expecting.
Yes, I do have a Virginia receiver on my list, Vince. That's a good call. Well, Moose Muhammad, that's obviously Muhsin Muhammad's kid. So they call him Moose. He's a kid that's played a lot of football for them. His numbers from last year, Vince, aren't really good. He's actually their 3rd highest producing receiver coming back from last year.
Okay.
But if you go look in 2022, when their quarterback, like last year's situation of quarterback was a mess. Once Connor Wegman went down, their cornerback room was a problem. It really was a problem. But when you look at you look at that and you're like, okay, that's a problem. But you look at him in 2022 when they had Connor Wegman, but they had Max Johnson at quarterback as well, and I believe they also had Haynes King on that team also. But he had two games that year where he had over 100 yards at Mississippi State and in the home game against Ole Miss. At Alabama, Moose Muhammad had 6 catches for 64 yards in a game they only lost by 4 points. And then against LSU in an upset win over LSU at the end of the year, he had 5 catches for 94 yards and a touchdown. He finished with 38 catches for 610 yards and 4 touchdowns. So I think last year was just more about he was a little banged up, and that was just a train wreck situation. I think of all the receivers that are going to benefit from the coaching change, I think Moose is the one that benefits the most, and that's why I put him on this list. Very talented player. They had a couple other receivers. Noah Thomas is a 6'6" kid. It's a long-limbed guy that Notre Dame looked at a little bit coming out of high school. He could be a guy that breaks out for them as well. So, but I like Moose Muhammad the most. The other guy that's a little bit of a projection, and I'm basing it more off what he did 2 years ago than what he did last year, is Ja'Cory Brooks from Louisville. He's a Bama transfer. I don't think he's quite as good as people make him out to be. He's still a good receiver. He's playing in a system where he's going to get a lot of touches. And he's a kid that 2 years ago at Alabama, Vince, so last year only had 3 catches for 30 yards. He was a little banged up, got in the doghouse and all that. But 2 years ago at Alabama, he had 39 catches for 674 yards and 8 touchdowns in 2022 at Alabama. So, and he was a highly ranked kid, which I don't really care about that, but he was their number 2 leading receiver in 2022 with Bryce Young at quarterback. And he had 6 catches for 117 yards, 2 touchdowns against Vanderbilt, 6 catches for 79 yards and a touchdown at Tennessee, 7 for 97 and a touchdown at LSU, 4 for 61 and a touchdown against at Ole Miss, 4 for 76 and a touchdown against Auburn. So this is a kid that's produced on the big stage against good football teams in his career.
Yeah.
And so I think, being in this, and now he's in the system, and he had 4 catches for 66 yards and a touchdown in the playoffs game against Cincinnati 2 years ago as a true freshman. So, this is a kid that's produced. I think he's going to be really good in that system and put up a lot of good numbers. So I think Louisville really benefited their pass game in the transfer portal this year. They had good receivers last year. Jamari Thrash was a really good receiver. But the combination of Colin Lacey and Ja'Cory Brooks, I think, is going to be even better than what they had a receiver last year.
I mean,
It's the best receiving core that Notre Dame's going to face right now based on what we've seen. Now, I think USC could end up with the best receiving core. And I know a lot of Notre Dame fans aren't talking about USC, but you got Deuce Robinson, who's a really talented kid, was a freshman last year that averaged like 20 yards a catch. You got Zechariah Branch. You've got some other Mekhi Lemon's going to go into sophomore year. I think the Hudson kid is going to be back. Kyle Pitts transferred back from UCLA. So they're going to have plenty of pass weapons at USC. The only concern I have about that is I don't know who's going to throw them the ball. That's the only question mark that I have when it comes to USC receivers. But I think those two units to me are the best coming back. And then my last guy is actually Malachi Fields from Virginia. Virginia's best receiver last year was a kid named Malik Washington, and he was a dude. Last season, Malik had 110 catches for 1,426 yards and 9 touchdowns. And for a Virginia team that had trouble, honestly, finding a quarterback last year. They had 2 quarterbacks that threw for over 1,000 yards. They were not great at quarterback last year. Their number 3 leading receiver only had 19 catches for 176 yards. Their number 2 guy, Malachi Fields, is who's on my second team this year. He had 58 catches for 811 yards. So they had their number 1 receiver had 1,400 yards. Their number 2 guy had 811 yards, and their number 3 guy had 176. So the point is, everybody knew where the ball was going, and these guys still produced. Yeah. And that says something to me. And they played at Louisville in a game where Virginia gave Louisville everything they can handle. He had 4 catches for 85 yards. They played NC State down to the wire. He had 3 catches for 60 yards in that game. You look at Miami, Florida. They almost beat Miami, Florida. He had 7 catches for 67 yards. They last game of the year against Virginia Tech, rivalry game, 6 catches for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. And they had an upset win over Duke late in the year. Remember, Duke had a really good secondary last year. He had 4 catches for 74 yards and a touchdown. This is a good football player. Now, he's an outside guy. Malachi Washington was more of their slot. That's going to be Chris Tyree now. I thought about putting Chris Tyree here just because of the production that position generated last year, but I just need to see Chris do it in this offense first. Can Chris be that guy? I think the guy that's going to be I think Chris is going to – last year the slot was the guy, and the outside guy was the complement off of that. This year I think it's reverse. I think Malachi Fields is going to be the guy, and then Chris Tyree is going to be the complement off of him is how I think it's going to work. So Malachi Fields is my final guy on my receiving core on offense.
I mean, you've got – and I'm projecting here. Well, not projecting. I'm teasing here a little bit. But, you mentioned that Louisville might be right now on paper, the best group of receivers and pass catchers because you've also got a Louisville tight end. So you've got 3 Louisville players.
Skill players, yeah. Part of that is there's just not a lot of good tight ends.
Oh, that's fair.
I mean, this is a kid that transferred in from San Diego State. He had 38 catches, 408 yards, 3 touchdowns. That's Mark Redmond.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. The number 2 tight end I have is Sam Roush from Stanford, who caught 28 balls for 280 yards last year. So that's more of a byproduct of just not as of right now. I don't, and I went through all the teams like who do we think is going to be starting tight ends, and there's just not a lot of really good players on that list. These are 2 good veteran. Now the guy that would have been number 1 on the list is a guy Benjamin Urasek who transferred to Georgia. He was at Stanford. He transferred to Georgia. He would have been number 1 on my list, but he transferred out. So now Sam Roush, who took over played a lot when Benjamin Urasek was hurt last year. He's my number 2 guy now. So it's more about that, Vince. There's just not a lot of good tight ends, and we don't even need to spend a lot of time on it. But Mark Redmond's a good, solid, move the chains type of tight end, solid blocker that I think was a really nice complementary player to those 2 receivers and what they're going to do this year. So, yes, he's a good football player.
Offensive line. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting from an offensive line standpoint. You mentioned it in the open that Notre Dame just isn't playing a whole lot of really good offensive lines.
As of right now.
Of right now, yes. Going into the season, on paper, all of those things. And so even so much so that there are 2 positions on this offensive line that didn't even get a selection for the second team.
I just couldn't.
I mean,
I would have been reaching. I'd have been talking about kids I hadn't really seen much of. Like, it would have been a stretch.
Right.
It would have been a stretch.
So let's start at tackle.
I'll say this real quick, though, Vince.
Please.
I had 4 centers that I considered.
Okay.
That's a position where, there's some really good players at center coming back. Guards. And one of the guys I have my first team at guard, I'm like, this guy, he's not even that good. He's a solid player. That's it. So my first team guys are Michael Gonzalez from Louisville, who's actually is a good football player. He was a starter last year. He's a really good football player, in my opinion. guy with some talent. And then my other guard is Emmanuel Pregnon, I think is how you say it. Excuse me. He was a starter at USC last year. Good player. I think the reason I have him here is I'm projecting him a little bit because now he's going to be in year 2 in that offense. He was a transfer last year.
Sure.
And I think he'll take a bit of a step up. Like there are other guard spots. I don't even know who it's going to be. There's a battle going on. Guy that was hurt last year, Quinones is going to battle for it. There's just not a lot of good guards, Vince. And I'm like, there's some guys I can put on there that played a lot last year, but I'm like, they were not good at all. And I'm just not even going to put them on there. Tackles a little better. You have Trey Zune from Texas A&M's on my list. He's a guy that Notre Dame recruited out of high school. Good football player.
Okay.
6'7" kid. Wasn't lights out for A&M last year. But again, I kind of give a lot of the A&M players on offense a little bit of a pass for down years last year because of just it was such a train wreck, Vince. The whole thing was just, and the coach is gone, and he was a mess when he was there, and it's just. I'm trying not to be too hard on some of those players. And I look at guys, where they were the year before. And a guy that I really like, as I said, is Trey Zune. I like him a lot. I think he's a good football player. And I look at, the kids they have coming back. They got Demetrius Crownover is a guy that I considered. He's their other tackle. He's not a bad football player. I just need to see a little bit more from him. But Trey Zune is a guy that I really like a lot. Gave up 23 pressures last year, Vince, which is more than I would like. So he's going to have to be more consistent. But he's a kid that's got some ability, and I think he's going to be coached better this year than he was last year as well, which will help him. My other tackle is Darius Washington from Florida State. Good football player, preseason All-ACC type of guy. Again, another guy that's a good player that I'm projecting to take a step this year. None of the guys are like locked down, proven. Oh yeah, that guy's going to be a really good player. But this is a kid that I thought was a good player last year, steady player last year, only gave up 11 pressures for Florida State last year. He's made steady improvement. He's now he's a 6th-year senior. This will be his 4th year as a starter.
Oh, wow.
Now he's been a rotation guy at times. He's even played some center for them because when they've had injuries, they've had to move guys around. But he gave up 16 pressures in 2020. In only 300 snaps, he gave up 22 in 21. He dropped down to 16 last year, or in 2022, and then last year he dropped down to 11 in the second most snaps that he played. So he's gotten steadily better, as he's kind of played. But this is a kid last year too, Vince, that played over 300 snaps at left tackle and played over 150 snaps at center.
Oh wow! Because
of all the injuries, I think the fact that they should be more stabilized this year, I think is going to also help him be even better because he's going to get a focus on just playing tackle
for sure
this season. So I
tackle's
think
a lot different than center. The footwork is so different from tackle to center. I mean,
it is.
And then you throw in snapping, obviously, as well. But like just the footwork itself is just so different from those two positions. So those aren't even alike.
No, the other position is center. Now this is the harder one.
Okay,
because the guy that I'm now projecting to be my first team center did not even play center. I don't know that he's ever played center. He would have been easily my first team starting offensive tackle, which is where he played last year. And I'm talking about Jonah Monheim from USC. Last year he played 762 snaps at left tackle, and he played 53 at right guard. The year before, he played 716 at right tackle and 286 at right guard. In his career, which is now going into its 5th season, he has played a grand total of, you ready for it, Vince? 0 snaps at center.
Oh, wow.
Did move there in the spring, seemed to handle it fine. Thought he did well in the blue gold game, their spring game. I think this one makes sense for them. I get it. They got a really talented young left tackle that they thought was ready to take over in Elijah Page, who Notre Dame fans should remember he was actually committed to Notre Dame for a little while. And so they're going to move Jonah because they just need to solidify center. Center was a bit of a solid, steady position for them last year, but not dynamic. They had Justin Diedrich last year, good steady player, just not real dynamic. I think they're looking for a little bit more. Yes, we want to be solid, but we need a little bit more movement here for this really to work. And so Jonah Monheim's going to be my center. I had a tough time with that one, Vince, because I had Brian Stevens from Virginia as my second team center, but you've got Gus Hartwig from Purdue, who's a good center, Vince, who I considered. I mean, he's a guy that deserves some thought there. And then Florida State has a kid named Maurice Smith, who also was a little bit banged up last year, but he was more of who their center is at Florida State But just like I said, he was a little banged up at times, but he played some center last year for them when he was healthy.
Okay.
And like I said, he missed some games. That's why Darius Washington had to go play some center when he was out. But he's a guy that's got over 1,500 snaps. As a matter of fact, Maurice Washington's also going into his 6th year. He's played 2,600 snaps in his career.
Wow.
At center, and he's played 179 at left guard. So this is a kid that's got a lot of experience. Not a dynamic, dominant player. If he was, he'd be in the NFL right now. But a good, smart, tough kid. Not huge. I mean, he's sub 300 pounds, but just smart, knows what he's doing, solid athlete. And when he's healthy, he's just a steady player. So he was another guy that I considered. Not even having him on my second team tells you about how good the center position is for Notre Dame's opponents coming back. But if I was forming a team and I could move guys around on my own, I'd be fine at guard because I'd take some of these centers and move them to guard.
Right, exactly.
And be okay there. So, but when I'm just trying to stay true to who's the guards and who's tackles, it made it a little bit tougher. But that's my and then my second team tackles. I had see here, I had Reed Holsky from Miami of Ohio, a really good football player. And then my fourth one, I was kind of reaching a little bit. I put Jordan Williams from Georgia Tech, who's a good, solid player. There's a kid named Marcus, I think it's Mbao from Purdue. That's a pretty good player. I talked to Ryan about him. Ryan's says the NFL teams are high on him, but he only played 6 games last year and got hurt. And then the year before he played guard.
Gotcha.
So it's just, it's kind of hard. I don't know. I can't
be a
project
projection.
him.
Yeah.
It's too much of a projection for a kid that I haven't studied.
Makes sense.
Like if I was like an NFL team, I would have watched a whole lot more film on him, and I would be able to make a little bit more of a smoother projection. But I just can't. I can't do it with Marcus. And even in 6 games last year, Vince, he gave up 11 pressures at tackle. So the transition to tackle was not a smooth one. He's a right tackle. He played 647 snaps in 2022 at right guard. And gave up 14 pressures. That's it. And only 446 total snaps last year. He gave up 11 pressures as a tackle. So clearly he was a little bit the transition wasn't smooth for him. And matter of fact, he played 6 games. He gave up at least 1 pressure in every game, and he gave up at least 2 in 4 of the 6 games last season. So not real great production. So but he's a wild card guy. Talking to Ryan, NFL teams seem to like him. So he's a guy that's sort of like, let's see how this one plays out. But I couldn't justify putting him on there now when I know these other guys are good, steady players. So that's my my all opponent offensive team, Vince.
So I want to do something kind of fun here. And I don't think it's something that we've really done in the past, but I want to ask you this question. You can tell me to go fly a kite, and that's fine. But if we're looking at Notre Dame's team, okay, so if Notre Dame was involved in this picking, right? First team, second team, does Notre Dame have any offensive players that would fall on this list, Brian? Is that something that you're prepared to do at this point? Can you do that for me? I'm curious to see where Notre Dame falls.
I mean,
tell me a lot about.
I'd even put Pat Coogan on the second team of guard.
Okay,
like enough. Honestly, like any of their guards can be a second team guard, if not first team.
Gotcha.
I mean, Pat Coogan and Emmanuel Pregnon are not that different based on what they did last season.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're just really good guards. So I mean,
right.
Right.
Exactly. Now, Ashton Craig, as much as I like Ashton Craig, he's not in consideration at center. There's too many good proven centers coming back.
Okay.
You say now maybe end of the year, maybe Ashton could be in that conversation, but he's just not there now. Like, there's some really good centers coming back. Yeah. Okay. Really good centers coming back next year.
Okay.
But I'd probably say Billy Schrouth, second team guard. If Rocco starts, I'd comfortably put him second team guard. I'd put Charles Jagasaw as a second team tackle. Honestly, I'd project him to second team tackle just because of what's coming back. And just like, look, if I had to pick a team, there's no way I'm taking that guy over Charles Jagasaw.
Yeah.
There's no way. Riley Leonard would be my first team quarterback. I mean, that's an easy one. That's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, I agree.
He is Haynes King, but a better passer and without the interceptions. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, think about that.
16 interceptions is a big number.
Yeah, it's a lot. That's a lot. So he'd be my first team quarterback. I'd consider Jeremiah Love as my second team running back, but it's hard for me to really go from 385 rushing yards and putting a guy that had almost 1,300 on the bench, even though it's
fair.
It's MAC level. I'd still consider it. Chris Mitchell would be a second team guy for me at receiver. You could also consider Jaden Greathouse, whoever you think, but I would go with Chris Mitchell simply because of the proven production.
Right.
You could make a case that he should be first team, but the fact that he did it at the group of 5 level, I'm just going to go with the guys that I have. Mitchell Evans is an easy first team tight end. So there's actually a lot of Notre Dame offensive players that I would put on this list. So
okay.
Riley Leonard would be on my first team. I'd have Mitchell Evans on my first team, and that would be it for my first team. My second team is where I'd have a lot of Notre Dame guys. Chris Mitchell, Billy Schrouth, and whoever wins the starting left guard position would be on there easily. And I'd at least consider Jeremiah Love. And if I'm going to look back at the end of the year, I think Jeremiah Love would probably be on there. But that's where I'm at for the Notre Dame guys, Vince.
Okay.
You have any that you could think about that like you would want to pound the table for us? All right, I had Jagasol left second team as well at tackle.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, that's right. You did say that. I don't know that I'm pounding the table for anyone. The fact that you said that Ashton Craig wouldn't be on the list tells me how good these centers are.
He would be in the conversation for third team.
Okay.
But he's not in the conversation.
Oh, that's fair. I'm not pounding the table to get him on, but that helps me to understand how good these centers are. Does that make sense? Like that it's a nice comparison for me to know that that's what your thought process is there. I mean, you pretty much named at least one guy from almost every position group that would at least have been on the second team. I mean, that's saying something about the Notre Dame offense. So, and then there's still a couple of guys that cracked the first
I think
team.
it says more about the opposition
that's
talent coming back. You know what I mean? But
my glass is always half full, Brian. Okay.
I get that. I would say this too. The fact that Chris Mitchell had 60 plus catches for 1,100 plus yards last year, and he's on my second team, does tell you a lot about what's coming back at receiver, though.
Sure.
There are some good receivers, like quarterback shaky, running back shaky, tight end is beyond shaky, O-line shaky, receivers very good.
Okay.
Very good. There's some very good units there.
You know I'm still disappointed in you, though, right?
Why?
Because you don't have a kicker on here.
Well, this is first team offense, not first team special teams.
Well, I mean, they score points.
I'd probably go with the kid from Miami of Ohio as my first team kicker, and I would go with the kid from Florida State as my first team punter.
See, look at that. You can do it.
Yeah.
Good for you.
And my kick returners would probably be, my kick returner would actually be Jaden Harrison, and my punt returner would be Zachariah Branch.
Okay.
If you wanted to do special teams.
I'm
not doing long snapper because I have no clue who any of the other teams long snappers are.
You're literally splitting hairs when you're talking about long snapping and things like that. So I'm totally fine with that. So, but that is the opponent first and second team offense with a little Notre Dame sprinkled in there. So make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, share with your family and friends, join the boards.irishbreakdown.com for
we've had we actually have had 2 gold members and 2 Shamrock sign up in the last 48 hours. So
that's awesome.
Definitely,
so I think somebody signed up for the Shamrock in the middle of the show last night.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's like, I just signed up. He goes, I'm good. I was like, because he was asking if there was any discounts.
Yeah,
he's like,
our normal rate's a discount,
right?
Like,
that's pretty much what everybody in the chat was telling him. Like,
just so you know, if that asks again, what you do get. So we had someone sign up yesterday for I believe he signed up for an annual membership. Maybe it was Shamrock. Might have actually been Shamrock.
Yeah,
and he got an email back that has the code to get 20% off. So if you sign up for annual or one of the booster clubs, you get 20% off the merch store. So he used that to buy a Gap Closer shirt.
There you go.
And I made like 50 cents off of it because the discount 20%. I don't make a whole lot of money off the merch store. Anyway, you know that, Vince, I priced it to where I don't make a lot of money off of it. When I raise prices, it's because the people who make the stuff raise prices. Right. That's the only time I raise price, because I don't do the merch to make a lot of money. That's more about like advertising. And also it's a community. I want them to want to do it. But so if you do sign up for a monthly membership, you get 10% off your entire merch store purchase. If you sign up for an annual or a booster club membership, you get 20% off. And if you sign up for a booster club, not only do you get 20% off the merch store, but you get a free IB Club mug if you do Shamrock or Blue Club. And if you do Gold Club, you not only get the IB Club mug, which only goes to club members. I can't have it. You can't buy it at a store. Vince doesn't have one. Same thing with IB Gold. So it's like this shirt, but instead of Nation, it says Gold Club.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get it in different colors and only, I don't have an IB Gold Club shirt. Vince doesn't have an IB Gold Club shirt. It is only for IB Gold Club members.
I was rewatching a high school football game from last year, 2 days ago, and they were doing an interview, and in the background was a gentleman wearing the IB Gold Club green t-shirt, just hanging out in the back of the interview. It was awesome.
Wasn't
I think
that
you
someone's
remember that,
father-in-law?
Yeah, you remember that, don't you? Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, there he is. That was awesome. So.
I love this. Jason Smith. Vince won't pony up to be a Gold Club member, huh?
Nope.
Vince never has to spend money on us. Besides, I'll be giving it right back to him. Okay, here's your paycheck. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
So,
we're about to go spend some money after the show anyway.
I know we are. We're going to go get our PS5s. Gosh, very excited. So anyway, that's just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that about the memberships for the board. It's a good time to remind people of that.
All right, let's jump into our final topic of the day, Brian, and that is the all-opponent defensive team. And so we're going to do it the same way that we did the offensive team. There's a first team, there's a second team, and we're going to go position by position, break it down just like we did. I want you to, you're not wrong. I want you to go through and give me your overall thoughts as you are putting this team together, because your overall thoughts on offense were like, man, the guard plays, there's not a lot of guys, et cetera, et cetera. All the spots are filled, first and second team.
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts on the defense as a whole compared to the offense, or just in defense in general? Like
a lot
your thoughts.
Better than the offense. The opposition defense is Vince, there's going to be a second team defensive end that had 14.5 tackles for loss and 7 sacks last year. The other second team defensive end had 12 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, and 64 pressures last season.
Man.
Like, that's not, those are second team guys.
Yeah.
There's a second team linebacker that had 110 tackles last year. So front seven, pretty darn good. Safety is loaded. I mean, there's guys that aren't even on the first or second team. Like the depth at safety is why I went to a 4-2-5 look for my, because I initially had it 4-3-4 is basically what I had it. 4 D linemen, 2 D ends, 2 D tackles, 3 linebackers, 2 safeties, 2 corners.
And I feel like that's what they do normally for like the All-America teams and stuff like that.
But I went a little bit different, and I went 4-2-5 because of how good the safety position is. I mean, it is loaded coming back this year. There's 2 safeties that had over 100 tackles last year coming back. So much, much better. Now, cornerback is the one exception. The 2 first teamers are really good, Vince. After the first 2 teams, it gets shaky. There's a number 3 couple guys, but it's a little shaky after your first team corners. But my first 2 teams are pretty good in the front 7 and at safety.
Okay.
Corners thinner after the first couple.
All right.
So that's where I'm at for that.
Well, let's jump right in with both feet. Let's go defensive line. We'll start on the edges. We'll go defensive end. Who do you have as your 2 defensive ends, first team and second team?
Well, my first one is Ashton Gillott, the kid from Louisville. So Notre Dame fans should remember him. He ripped Notre Dame up last year. Very talented player. The only thing, like if I was making a team, the only thing I wouldn't love is both of my ends are kind of bigger power type of guys. But I could put Ashton Gillott if I needed to at Viper if I needed to. But my 2 ends are 270 and 280. Last year he had 45 tackles, 14.5 tackles for loss, and 11 sacks. He had 2.5 tackles for loss and 1.5 sacks against Notre Dame alone last season. So he kicked Notre Dame's butt.
One of the reasons that Notre Dame didn't have a lot of success offensively.
But he had 3 tackles for loss against BC, he had 2 tackles for loss against Duke, 2 against Virginia, 1.5 against Kentucky. So he was a pretty good player last year, Vince, overall. Not a real explosive guy, but a strong guy, smooth athlete, has a really nice advanced, pass rushing repertoire. He'll rush the quarterback up the middle. He'll stunt. I mean, he does a lot of different things. My other D end is Nick Scourton, who transferred to Texas A&M from Purdue. He had 50 tackles last year, 15 tackles for loss, 10 sacks, and 42 pressures. And he's a kid that I find very intriguing. He's not as explosive as I think some people make him out to be. But he's 280, 285, right? I mean, how twitchy do you expect him to be at that size? But he's very smooth, very strong, Has a nice assortment of moves, in my opinion. He's obviously very productive. I always worry about these kids like that because remember last year the Jack Sullivan kid from Purdue that transferred to USC, and everyone's like, oh, what a big pickup for him. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know, man. I wasn't in love with Jack Sullivan when I watched him on film, even though he had great production. He had, during his career at Purdue, or had good production and people were talking about him, stuff like that. But when you look at a kid like this is a kid that's got production, film matches, like his production is elite. And he's got a pretty nice advanced repertoire, pretty good run defenders too, Vince. Like you look at his 15 tackles for loss, 11 sacks, 42 pressure. Like what a great pass rusher. And he is. And he's got some power moves that got me a little nervous against Notre Dame's right tackles who struggle a little bit with power.
Sure, yeah.
And if I'm those teams, I'm putting him right on our right tackle, looking at it from the Notre Dame, right on their right tackle, looking at it from the team's defensive coaching standpoint. I'm going to put my Nick Scourton on their right tackle, and I'm just going to say, go dominate. Like, that's what I'm doing. I'm not going to have him fooling with Charles Jagus all that much, just because he'd have some wins against Charles, but like that kid's 330 and powerful. I'm putting this kid over on their right tackle. So he's a kid that is a very impactful player. He's on my first team defensive end. My two defensive tackles, I also have another Texas A&M kid, Shamar Turner, 6'4", 290 kid, he could play big end in a 3-down defense, Vince. So if I was playing an odd front, I could bump him out, Shamar Turner out to 5 technique, maybe some 4-eye. But in Mike Elko's defense, he's going to do a lot of what Dwayne Carter did at Duke. Be on the edge at times, but primarily be a guy that's playing over the guards. Very athletic player, very disruptive player. Not a big guy, 6'4", 290, but athletic and plays with a pretty good motor. Well, when his motor's running hot, he's really good.
Gotcha.
He needs to have it run hotter more frequently, but when it does, it's pretty good, man. So when you look at this kid, he's a kid that had 10.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, and 36 pressures last year. As an interior guy. So more tackles for loss than Howard Cross, more sacks than Howard Cross, and only 3 fewer pressures than Howard Cross had last year. So if that puts into context the kind of production he had. So now you have 2 kids from Texas A&M on the D line on that first team. It's not a well, I got to put somebody there. Now I'll say this. Well, I'll just finish up. Bear Alexander is my other first team D tackle from USC. Bear is in a bit of an enigma. When he wants to be good, he's really good. He just doesn't always want to be good.
Right.
That's going to be the
season last year.
Yeah. Now Bear's playing for the NFL. So I think you're going to get a better version of Bear more frequently.
That's
because
true.
Now he's NFL eligible.
It's contract year.
Bingo. That's what Bear cares about.
Yeah.
You don't go from Georgia to US. You don't start at Georgia on a championship team as a freshman and then go to USC because you want to win.
Right.
You're going there because you want to get paid. That's it. Well, now he's playing to get paid even more from the NFL. And so I think you're going to get the best version of Bear Alexander. But even without it, he still had 48 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, and 32 pressures last year. On a D-line where he didn't have a lot of help around him.
Sure.
He was the focal point for opposing teams. There was a big drop-off from my first 2 D tackles to my second team D tackles. My second team DNs, however, were very good. I thought long and hard about putting Patrick Payton on my first team defensive line. I really did.
In Florida State.
Right. He had 14.5 tackles for loss last year, 7 sacks, 10 pass breakups.
Wow.
And 44 pressures. The reason I thought about putting him there is not because I necessarily think he's better than Ashton Jalot or Nick Scourton, but I was trying to think of like, okay, if I'm putting starting defense together, I got those 2 power guys. I'd want sort of an edgy stand-up, Viper type, and Patrick Payton is. He's 245, 250-ish, twitchy. He's an edge rusher. He's a 2-point stance, attack the quarterback, but he had 10 pass breakups. Most of those were getting up and batting passes down, but there were sometimes he was dropping into coverage and he'll slant around and play the middle, and he's a really athletic kid. He's got to put it all together and be more consistent, and he's going to get a lot more attention. Here's the thing, Vince, about Patrick Payton. His numbers last year were great, but that's with teams really thinking about, okay, we got to stop Jared Verse on the other side. We got to stop Braden Fisk up the middle. Now he's their dude.
Yeah.
They did have Marvin Jones transferred in from Georgia, who's, was a highly ranked kid, but didn't do a lot for Georgia last year. They've got some good interior guys, one of which I have on my second team, Joshua Farmer, who's on my second team D tackle. But he's going to face a lot more attention this year. there. The other second team defensive end for me is I hope I'm saying this correctly, but it's Brian Ugwu from Miami of Ohio. He's not on there just because his name is Brian. Okay. He's on there because that's right.
Spell it right. So
he doesn't spell it right at all. He's on there because last year he had 62 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, and 60. This is according to Pro Football Focus. 64 pressures on the quarterback.
That's crazy.
That is crazy. Really good production. Really good production. So he's a kid that I like a lot, Vince. You watch his film. He's a pretty good football player. The thing I like about him, too, is he had 12 tackles for loss last year. He did not have a single game with more than 2. It was steady.
Just steady the whole.
Steady production.
Brings his lunch pail.
That's right. That's right. And not a real big guy, 6'3", 250.
Which is probably why he was under-recruited.
Yeah, and he was young. He's a younger guy too, Vince. So he's like,
okay.
I should say young. He's inexperienced. He's only really been a 2-year player for them. He was hurt in 19. He's got some unique story. He played 19 and didn't play at all in 20 or 2021. And I'm not sure why. He's got like a really unique backstory. But then he comes back in 2022, he's a pretty good player, and then he breaks out last year. Now he's going to be like a 6-year guy.
It's a lot of years.
6-year guy, 19.
22, 23, 24.
Yeah, so he's a good football player. Good football player. Now, the kid that they had opposite him last year also had 12 tackles for loss, and he's gone. So now this kid's going to have a lot more attention than he had before, so I'm curious how he's going to handle that. But he's a good football player. There's a couple other guys I considered for this list, Vince. One is Jamil Muhammad from USC, who had 10.5 tackles for loss and 6.5 sacks last year, and he did not make my first 2 teams. Think about that. A Power 5 defensive lineman who had 10.5 tackles for loss and 6.5 pressures or 6.5 sacks did not make my first or second team at defensive end. If that tells you anything about how good the edge players are that Notre Dame's going to face this year. So there's some good ones. D-tackle, the much bigger drop-off. I have Zeke Biggers, who's a big old 6'6", 330-pound kid from Georgia Tech, just a run plugger. And then, as I said, Josh Farmer from Florida State. Now, I thought about putting the other kid from Florida State on there. They have a kid who transferred in from Miami 2 years ago. Was supposed to be a really good player for them last year, but got hurt. He's healthy now, and I thought, but I need to see it. Same thing with kind of like Connor Wegman. I just need to see him do it first before I put him on there.
So the next spot is linebacker, and you only have 2 slots, right? 2 first team, 2 second team. You mentioned that you kind of went that route because of the strength at safety. Was it also because there weren't as many linebackers? Was it a kind of a combination? Okay.
Yep, it
okay.
was.
I just wanted to double check on that. So,
I would have had no problem filling out a 2 deep at linebacker. It just wouldn't have been as strong as what my 2 deep was at safety.
Makes sense.
That's kind of where it comes from. So it wasn't like the guard position where it's like, I got my 2 teams and, I got my 1.5 team. So at linebacker, here, I got an interesting one too, Vince. My first team linebacker is pretty easy. Who those are? My first team guys are that was my second team. My first team guy is TJ Quinn from Louisville. He's a really good football player. Louisville's got 2 guys in my front 7 and 4 overall starters. I mean, Louisville might have more first team guys. I think Louisville actually has more first team players than anybody else, Vince. If you want to kind of count that.
Like both sides of the ball?
Both sides of the ball has more. Yes. I believe they have more first team guys than anybody else that Notre Dame's going to play this year. The thing with Louisville is they have major question marks like quarterback, and there's some where they don't have big time players. There's some bigger question marks. So
they have 6.
Yeah, because they have 7, right? They have 4 on defense and then 3 on offense, right?
They
a
only
receiver,
have
a tight end, a guard.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You're right.
You forgot about the guard.
I did.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's the 7th.
Yep. 7.
So I've got TJ Quinn, 92 tackles last year, 2.5 tackles for loss, a pick. Not a super like disruptive guy numbers wise, but a very steady, solid player for that defense. I like TJ Quinn. That might be a little bit biased because I liked him when I was prepping for the Louisville game last year. I'm like, this kid's a good football player. But he's around the ball a lot. And then my other first team linebacker is a kid from Miami of Ohio, Matt Salopek. Very, very productive. He's a typical like 6th-year senior MAC linebacker, right? He's going to not be as athletic as other guys. But this dude had 143 tackles last year, 8.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks for what was a pretty darn good Miami defense. They only gave up 15.9 points per game last year.
Yeah.
And this is a team that went on the road and beat Cincinnati last season.
Yes,
So,
they did.
like, they are a good football. I mean, the last game of the season they lost to App State. They lost 13-9. They did not lose because of their defense. Another loss they had to Toledo. They lost 21-17. Then they got a rematch against Toledo, beat them 23-14. So they had a very good defense last season, and this kid had a mess of tackles. Now, listen, he had 69 assisted tackles, but he still had 74 solo tackles, which is a pretty good amount of tackles.
Yeah.
He tied for 6th in the country in solo tackles last year. So, yeah, his 143 gets pumped up a little bit by a lot of assisted tackles, but he's not one of those guys that has more assists than solos. I mean, think about it. Notre Dame's highest number of solo tackles last year was 41. This kid had 74. So he's a good football player. You know, not a super athlete, but a good athlete for that level. And not the biggest guy, but a thumper. He's physically smart and incredibly productive. So those are my 2 linebackers. My second team linebackers, I have a Navy kid on there, Vince, Colin Ramos, who's, again, another really good football player from Navy. Thought about putting him on my first team, to be honest with you.
Okay.
He's an inside backer, had 110 tackles last year, 9 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and 4 pass breakups. Very active guy up the middle and also in the pass game. And then my second team linebacker, Vince, is a USC linebacker. Literally. I don't have one.
I was going to say.
And here's what I mean, because I don't know who's going to start.
Okay.
They've got two really good football players coming back, in my opinion, that I believe are kind of battling for the same spot from what I've read. And that is Mason Cobb, who last year for USC had 85 tackles and 7 tackles for loss. The year before at Oklahoma State, he had 96 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. He was not as good for USC last year. I think that was because of the defense. This is some kid that transferred in from, Oklahoma A&M and, couldn't handle the step up. This is a kid that proved himself at the Power 5 level, comes to USC as part of a bad defense and isn't as productive. Then this offseason, they got a pickup from another transfer from Oregon State, a kid named Easton Mascarenas Arnold, who last year in the Pac-12 was a first-team All-Pac-12 kid last year, who had 107 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 2 INTs. Now, you could have made a case that the winner of this battle should actually be on my first team over the kid from Miami of Ohio, and that's very fair. But the fact is I don't know who's going to start for them at that position. Or are they going to rotate? Or is there a scenario where they play together? I don't know if that's great for the USC defense because I think they're both Mikes, and I don't know that they would play great together. So it's kind of whoever wins that battle, I think is going to be a second team guy. That's how I have it.
Makes sense,
in my opinion.
Okay.
So, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So let's go to what I believe is the strength of your defensive teams that you've been putting together here. No,
I'd still say end. The end. The D line is pretty good. It's close. It's a close second.
Okay,
Vince.
but it's deep.
And you could make a case that it's better, but
Gotcha.
I'd say slightly behind defensive end, and that's safety.
Gotcha. So yeah, let's talk safety. You got 3. So again, it's a 4-2-5. So there are 3 safety candidates for both teams. So you got 6 safeties that you're going to talk about here, and
there's guys I left off that I'm like, dude, I'm
looking at the names right now. Yeah. Okay.
So my first team safeties are Jonas Sanker, kid from Virginia, really good football player, 107 tackles last year, 4 tackles for loss, 11 pass breakups. Does a lot of different things, right? Comes downhill. He's a really good alley player. Gets over the top a little bit. Will come into the box at times, plays the perimeter pretty well. He's not elite in coverage, but he's good in coverage. Very active player. The other one is Dylan Thieneman from Purdue. I believe he was a freshman last year, I think. Actually, let me look that up real quick, Vince, because he was really, really productive for them. Yeah, he was a 2023 signee for Purdue.
Okay.
So he was a true freshman last year. He comes out as a true freshman, racks up 106 tackles, 6 interceptions, and 2 pass breakups. He does a lot of middle of the field. He does a lot of like post safety stuff. He'll come into the box, obviously, because he had 106 tackles.
Right.
But not in the box. He'll come into the alleys, but he does a lot of his production comes from playing deeper. And so he'll have a lot of cleanup tackles, but he'll play the alleys pretty well in the run game. That's what I like about him. He makes a lot of plays coming in the alleys in the run game and the screen game, but then also makes a lot of plays over top. I think like at least 4 of his interceptions were him either taking away a deep ball where he came off the hash or came out deep middle and then picked it off. And then I think he had another interception that was off of a tip ball where he was right in the perfect position, like Xavier Watts was, where he was where he needed to be. The ball gets tipped and he's right there to pick it off. Say, well, you got to be in the right position. You say, well, he didn't make that play. Yeah, you did. It's like the pick that Xavier had against USC. Well, yeah, he made the pick because Caleb Williams overthrew it, but you had to be in position to where you were closing where you needed to close and be where you needed to be in position to make that play. So he's a kid that I really like, Vince. He's not a super, super twitchy guy, but he's a pretty long, smooth athlete that covers a lot of ground and makes a lot of plays. I mean, as a true freshman, you make 106 tackles, 6 picks, and 2 breakups. You're pretty flipping good.
Yeah, no doubt.
And then the other safety I have is Devin Neal from Louisville. He's another really good player. He was a guy that I debated not having on the first team. The first 2 were no-brainers. And I like Devin Neal a lot. It's his all-around production that I like that I went with over some of the other guys. 74 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 4 picks, 6 breakups. Very active safety, not great at anything, just good at everything. And a guy that was very, very productive for Louisville last year. And so he was my third safety. If I was putting a team together, he'd probably be kind of like my rover safety. My nickel safety is probably where we'll put him. Maybe Dylan Thieneman now in year 2. I wouldn't have done that last year with Dylan Thieneman. He was just a little too skinny. But he's a guy that I could see as kind of a rover type as well in their defense. And then my second team safeties, I had Ryan Lane from Navy, 66 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 4 picks, and 8 breakups. He was actually one of the few players against Notre Dame that looked like he belonged. He had 2 pass breakups against Notre Dame last year. Him and the linebacker Ramos were the only 2 kids that looked like they belong on the field against Notre Dame on defense last year. So he's a really good football player. I like him quite a bit. And then my other safeties are Achille Arnold from USC, actually I'll do Achille Arnold last. My other safety is Shaheem Brown from Florida State. Good football player. I think he's a little overhyped by some, but he's a good football player. 53 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 1 pick, 4 breakups. Good football player. I think he'll be a little bit more productive this year for Florida State, but not a dynamic impact guy. He was clearly a second-team guy, but he's a good football player that I had on my second team. Anyone that's going to say that Florida State, well, we'll talk about that when we do the Notre Dame guys. But the other spot was a battle between 2 USC kids.
Okay.
So USC got 2 safety transfers that I both think are good football players. They got Achille Arnold from Oregon State, who was a first or second team All Pac-12 guy last year, depending on who you look at, and was a very productive player for them last season. 60 tackles, 2 picks, 6 pass breakups. Didn't get a ton of balls completed on him. And then the other kid they got was a kid from UCLA who's came over with DeAnton Lynn, and that's Kamari Ramsey. He had 40 tackles, 1 INT, and 4 breakups. Now, I actually think Kamari Ramsey is a better cover player, in my opinion. But Achille Arnold's a little bit more productive. So I went with him because of the production. But I really battled back and forth between Ramsey and Arnold. And honestly, if you wanted to take the Navy kid out, you could put both of them on there. But I really like Ryan Lane. I think he's a good football player. And I may be saying his name incorrectly, the kid from Navy. But he's a really good football player. So I'm comfortable with what I have. But I'm not going to argue if somebody wants to put Kamari Ramsey over any of the – like you could make a case for Kamari Ramsey over Shaheem Brown. But the fact that he's kind of in a new defense where Shaheem Brown's kind of returning in the system and it's going to be a little bit ahead in that regard, I went with Shaheem Brown there. Now, so there was like 7 safeties that you were looking at. And there's a couple other guys, Vince, that if I was going to make a third team, I'd have felt very comfortable having a third team with 9 safeties. I mean, there's some good safeties coming back on this list, Vince. So not even guys that were necessarily on this list, but guys that you look at and say, well, there's some good football players coming back next year at the safety position. Some really good football players. And then we're at corner last, right?
We are at corner, yeah.
Big drop-off between first and second team, and then really big drop-off between first team and my first guy on the second team. And then there's a big drop-off between him and the second guy on the second team. And then after that, right?
Okay.
So my first team corners are Quincy Riley from Louisville, we talked about him last year. Him and Jarvis Brownlee were arguably the best corner tandem Notre Dame faced last year. Brownlee was a tall, long, like 6'3". Really, this kid was more of that short, stout, 5'11", physical, athletic, and super instinctive, Vince. You're talking about a corner that had 49 tackles. We had 3 picks and 12 pass breakups last year.
12 is a lot. Double-digit
Like,
pass breakups
Benjamin
is a good number.
Just for comparison's sake. So, he's not quite the cover player that Benjamin is, but he's a really good football player, Vince, and a guy that, I mean, he's not like, on offense, there's some guys that are like, well, he's first team because I don't know who else to put on there. Like, this kid was a no-brainer first team guy. And honestly, coming into the season, in most situations, he's not getting the love that my other first-team cornerback's getting, Fentrell Cypress. But if I could have one of the two, I'm honestly taking Quincy Riley. I think Quincy Riley was the better player last year. He got targeted. Look at these numbers, Vince. He got targeted 63 times last year, which somewhat explains the 12 pass breakups, right? But he only allowed 23 completions. It's a 36.5% completion rate, and he gave up 291 yards. This is a really good football player in a league where there's a lot of teams that throw the football. So I like Quincy Riley quite a bit. The other kid is Fentrell Cypress. This is his, and here's why I'm good putting Fentrell here. He wasn't great last year, to be honest with you. He was good last year, but he transferred over from Virginia, where he was an all-ACC guy the year before at Virginia. Really dynamic guy, was targeted 52 times, gave up 26 catches in the league for 503 yards. He only gave up 179 the year before and 184 the year before that. He had some issues last year with what Florida State did. I think the scheme change hurt him a little bit, but he's now in year 2 of the system, and I think he's going to be a lot better than he was in year 1. I think
500
also
yards is a lot.
Yes. Adam Fuller has a lot better feel for what he's good at and what he's not good at as well, which I think will allow them to put him in better position. So I'm actually comfortable putting him there. He's going to get a lot more. A matter of fact, let me look at the preseason magazines, because I think the Lindy's had, I could be wrong, but I thought Lindy's had Fentrell ranked higher than Quincy Riley. Let me go look here real quick. Yeah, they had Fentrell ranked as the 7th best corner in the country, and they didn't have Quincy Riley in the top 12. I think Quincy Riley is one of the 10 best cornerbacks coming back. So that's kind of where I'm at for them. Those are two clearly the 2 best corners, but Quincy Riley is hands down the best cornerback coming back. So when I add Notre Dame guys to this, Quincy Riley's staying on my first team.
Okay.
My second team, the one guy that's a no-brainer, my second team is John Humphrey, who's at USC. He transferred from UCLA. He came over, because I got your text. He came over from UCLA with DeAnton Lynn. So even though he's a transfer, he knows the system.
Gotcha.
So he'll make a smooth transition. Good football player, a little on the thin side, 31 tackles last year, 2 INTs, 3 breakups, good cover player, not dynamic. He's a long kid. I think he's like 6'2", I believe. He's a tall kid, good football player, not dynamic, not elite like Riley, not physical, but I think he's also going to be a lot better this year too, Vince, because he's got just another year of experience under his belt. So he's a guy that I like a lot. And then my fourth cornerback was a little harder to find. I'm going to be honest with you. I had to project a little bit. I took Tyreek,
a little.
Yeah. Oh, big time. I took Tyreek Chappell from Texas A&M. And I don't even know that he's going to even be like a starter for them this year. I mean, it's after the top 3, there's a bit of a drop off, in my opinion, at cornerback, Vince. There really is. Like USC's other corners aren't very good. There's just not a lot of good corners in the schedule. After, like, the first 2 are pretty darn good. John Humphrey's pretty good as well. Not as good as the first 2. And then after that, there's a big drop off. So Florida State's other cornerback, the Thomas kid's a pretty talented player. He's another 6'2" guy, a lot of ability. He just wasn't that good last year, in my opinion. He benefited from playing, like he was always he was a good player. I'll just leave it at that. He was a good player. He's going to be the starter now this year. I think he's one of those guys that he's either going to make a big jump now that he's a starter, or being a starter is going to expose him a little bit because he was in the rotation last year and he gets beat a little bit. So I'm not quite sure which way that's going to go, to be honest with you. So, and I don't have a clue how to pronounce that kid's first name, to be honest with you. I've tried. I even tried to find videos, and his name was pronounced differently by everybody. It's AZAREYE'. So I think it's Azarea is what I think it is. Thomas. So solid football player, had 10 pass breakups last year. But again, I think that's because of how they used him.
Yeah.
He was able to kind of drive on the ball. You could make a case for him being on that second team at corner. I just need to see more from him as a starter now. But if you were to say, hey, you'd have him over Tyreek Chappell, I wouldn't argue with you. I really wouldn't. I had a hard time with who my fourth corner was going to be completely honest with you. A really tough time. I just think Chappell, to me, is just a little bit more experienced and was a pretty solid player for them last year. He's just banged up a little bit. If he can stay healthy, I think he'll be a good player for them. Be a good player for them. I mean, like look at his numbers last year. I mean, last 2 years, Chappell's held opponents to less than 50% completions. So he's been a pretty solid player for them. Just I don't know if the injuries and some other guys have come in, if he's even going to necessarily start for them based on some things I've read. But he's a good football player. I like him. All
right, so let's play the game. Let's play the Notre Dame game where we insert Notre Dame guys into this list, and that will definitely help me. I'm sure it'll help other Notre Dame fans because we're very well aware of what Notre Dame guys are and their talent level, but where do they stack up against the opponents that Notre Dame will be playing? So let's start at the front, defensive line, any defensive linemen that are going to make this team.
No edge players, and it's not even a debate. None are in the conversation. Just none.
Okay.
If RJ Open is every bit as good at Notre Dame as he was at Duke, he's still not on my first two teams with the kids that they're looking at.
Wow.
Now, if somebody has a breakout, plays above their skis a little bit or takes a huge jump, then maybe they can push the Miami of Ohio kid out. But right now they're not there. Defensive tackle, I would have two. I would have Howard Cross on the first team with Shamar Turner, the kid from A&M. I would put Bear Alexander on my second team. I'd kick both second team guys off, have Bear on my second team, and then Riley Mills on my second team.
Okay.
Is how I would have that. Now, Bear could end up being the best D tackle that we're talking about here if he wants to be. Like, he's the most talented, but
that's
a big question mark. And if the season's not going well, does he check out?
Yeah, exactly.
That's if Bear had Howard Cross's motor, he might be the best D lineman that they face this year.
Yeah.
On the inside.
Right.
The lack of motor is the concern, but the talent is certainly there. But so I would have Shamar Turner and Howard Cross as my first team, and I'd have Bear Alexander and Riley Mills on my second team.
Any linebackers making the cut?
Yes, I would have Jack Kaiser on my second team.
Yep, that's exactly what I was thinking too. I was like, he's productive. He's going to be, if he gets the snaps that he should get, he's going to rack up tackles.
If we were talking about projecting the end of the season, I might even consider putting him in over the Miami of Ohio kid on the first team. But, Jack's got to prove himself. We got to be consistent, right? There's some guys on here that say it's pretty good, but he's got to prove himself. Jack's got to prove that he can be an every down inside linebacker.
Yep.
But I would put him over the USC kids right now on the second team. And you could also put him over Carlos Ramos in Navy. I mean, if Jack Kaiser went to Navy, he's their best linebacker. Let's be honest about that. But you've got to prove it. So
for the past 3 years,
whoever you want to take off at linebacker, I mean, I would have him there. No question.
So moving to safety, obviously you got Xavier Watts, and then you've got the combo of Adon Schuler and Rod Hurd. And, I assume Xavier Watts is on this list at somewhere.
100%.
Okay.
100%. He's the best safety on this list.
Okay, fair
enough. And I would bump down Devin Neal to second team.
Okay.
And then I would probably bump out Shaheem Brown from Florida State off of the second team. Is what I'd probably do. It's either him or the kid from Navy would get bumped off.
Okay.
One of those two would get bumped off. But right now, I'd go Shaheem Brown would get bumped off.
Okay.
And that's easy. I mean, Xavier Watts jumps right number one on the list.
Okay. Cool. That tells me a lot. All right. And then corner.
Yes, Benjamin. Even if you tell me he's not going to play the first 2-3 games, I'm still putting Benjamin Moore. I mean, Benjamin Morrison in 9 and 10 games is still a better player than Fentrell Cypress in 12.
Okay.
I mean, he just is. Quincy Riley and Benjamin Morrison are easy my first two corners. Easily my first two corners. And if you want some, you want some data to back that up, Vince, right? Just to kind of prove why that should be a no-brainer to people. Let me give you some numbers, okay? Benjamin Morrison in 2 years at Notre Dame. Obviously, he's been a pretty darn good football player. Let me pull this up here real quick and give you some data because you know me, I like backing things up with arguments.
With actual facts.
With actual facts and some data. So Benjamin In the last 2 years, Vince, so at Notre Dame, he's been targeted 102 times. He's allowed 47 completions, 46.1% completion percentage, and he's given up 575 yards. Okay, so he's done in 2 years. Last year, Fentrell Cypress, in just one season at Florida State, as a fifth-year senior, by the way, was targeted 52 times, gave up 26 catches for 503 yards.
It's so many.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So
he's an easy bump out. I mean,
yeah, and he was he was pretty good at Virginia, and his numbers were pretty good at Virginia. But I was never like in love with him the way that some people were, even at Virginia.
Sure.
But he was a good football, and he'd be easily on my second team, and I would bump him down to second team, and I would bump out Tyreek Chappell from Texas A&M.
Gotcha.
Now, I can't put the other Notre Dame corners on there, but it would not shock me if by the end of the year we're talking about either Christian Gray or being on there as my second team. But right now I can't in good conscience, and we'll put him there. But Ben, so first team for the defense, I'd have Howard Cross, Xavier Watts, and Benjamin Morrison. On the second team, I'd have Riley Mills, and I would have Jack Kaiser. I also think if we were talking about the end of the year, it wouldn't shock me if like Drake Bone was on there. But again, I can't put a kid like that on there. What 100 tackle guy am I going to take off of that list to put a guy that's never started a game in his life? You know what I mean? So it's not about talent. And yes, we are projecting to a degree, but our projection versus guys that have done it, done it at a high level. I mean, the two USC kids have been all conference players at the Power 5 level. Not at the school, they're not at USC, but Easton Macarenas, I think is how you say his name. Easton is, what's his? Give me a second. It's Easton Macarenas Arnold. He was a first team All Pac-12 linebacker last year. So I can't in good conscience put Drake there.
Right
now, maybe one of the edge players jumps up and can knock the Miami of Ohio kid off of there, but that's where I'm at for the Notre Dame defense, Vince. If I had a nickel position, I might have Jordan Clark on my second team, but I don't have a nickel position on my defense.
Right. Do either one of the two specialists make it onto your first or second team for Notre Dame?
Mitch Jeter, I would consider on my second team. I'd have to go through. There's actually some pretty decent kickers on Notre Dame's board this year.
Now, the kid from Miami of Ohio is at Alabama now.
Did he leave?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that he had left.
The Groza Award winner. Yeah, he's gone.
Yeah.
So
I don't know why a kicker would. Okay, whatever.
I'm just telling you that's what happened.
I don't like. Why would a freaking kicker leave? That's just lame. That's super, super lame. Yeah, he is at Bama. I'm looking at that now. So yeah, I mean, I might put Jeter on the second team.
He's
first team.
Very accurate kicker.
Yeah,
very accurate kicker.
Yeah.
I'm not putting Thor anywhere on there because you just don't know.
No, I did say Jaden Harrison would be my first team kick returner,
and he should be.
Right,
he's an All-American at that position. So
yeah,
for sure. Okay, cool. All right, well, that's going to do it for the defensive all-opponent team that Irish Breakdown, specifically Brian, has put together, and also where Notre Dame falls.
You didn't have to tell people that.
I'm okay with that.
I could have said we put this list together, and I'm just the one that's talking because I like to talk and I talk a lot.
I give credit where credit is due.
People would buy that.
Well, they would, but at the same time, you put a lot of work into this, man. Like, you deserve the credit. I have no problem with that whatsoever.
That.
Of course,
it's a team effort, baby. It's a team effort.
It always is, but I will give credit where it is due. So, but no, thanks for hanging out with us, you guys. Really appreciate it. This was a fun Tuesday show. Hit a lot of different topics today. That is for darn sure. So, if you want to continue the conversation, head over to the boards.irishbreakdown.com. I'm sure that there will be some discussion about some of these picks that were made, and that's what makes the board fun. So
I'm actually going to do an article on this in the next couple of days.
Perfect.
And have that list. There may be like a couple little alterations.
Yeah, some tweaks.
But and then when I put it on the board, we'll have some fun with it on the board.
Yes,
so
absolutely. So, but make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, notification bell, share with your family and friends. We will be back tomorrow at 1:00 for yet another show. It's buy, sell, hold day, I believe, right? Isn't that Wednesday? Okay,
yes, sir.
So buy, sell, hold day. on Wednesday. We'll have another topic that we will discuss as well.
We're going to talk about a little bit about the Notre Dame run defense.
That's right, run defense.
Yeah,
we just talked about this last night. It already went my notes are upstairs, so I didn't have it in front of me. But
it's all good. And then Thursday we're going to talk about the Notre Dame run game on offense and what we think it needs to do to be better and our expectations. And then we will preview the SEC.
Yes, the SEC. Yes. So make sure you guys hang out with us this week. We're going to have a lot of fun with it. And we'll be back tomorrow at 1. Of course, I believe Sean and Jesse and Ryan are all going to be tonight at 5 o'clock. So make sure you check out IB Nation Sports Talk as well. So for Brian, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.